Hello everyone, welcome to What If Deku Was Declared Useless and Makes Team with Miles Morales and RWBY Part 1. Before we start, please go support Drag0n5 on for writing that awesome fanfic. This is the translated version I made. There will be some wrong he or she calling here because it's translated, so let me clear this. Deku is a male in this story. Who are you? The rain came from out of nowhere. The news had said today was supposed to be clear skies, but that was clearly not the case. It wasn't too bad though, the people were adaptable. They simply went about their day like normal, although with a bit of a rush to get out of the rain. And amongst the people were three men who were walking with a goal in mind. They didn't speak as they were all focused on preparing themselves for the mission they shared. Soon they found themselves in front of police building. Their destination. Without hesitation they entered through the doors to be introduced to a station with bustling police officers, indicating it being a busy day. Not that surprising considering what they were expecting to happen. The cops took instant notice of them and nodded their heads. They all knew why they were there. The three nodded back in greeting before silently making their way to their predetermined destination. They entered through another door to be greeted by a man looking through a window. From the way he was dressed it was clear he was a detective. "Are they in there?" one of the men questioned. The detective turned around to see the three new entries revealing his face. Namasa. Namasa nodded before greeting the three men. All Might. Night-Eye. Nezu. They are, the detective nodded before looking over the three men. Where's Izawa? Noticing the one other person he was expecting was not there. He's on standby along with other heroes in the vicinity should they try something, Night-Eye explained. What do we know about them? Just this, Namasa said, handing over a single file. Night-Eye took the file and opened it. You must be joking. I wish I was, Namasa admitted. How intriguing. Nezu smiled with a gleam in his eyes before passing the file over to All Might. Have they said anything yet? All Might questioned as he read over the file. Just three things, Namasa admitted. Which were? Night-Eye questioned. First they requested a plate of cookies, Namasa admitted. They requested cookies, Night-Eye raised an eyebrow. Well, the girl did, Namasa admitted. The boy just went with it. The couple? All Might asked. Not from what we could tell, Namasa answered. They seemed to just be good friends. I assume the remaining requests were more serious, Night-Eye assumed. The second was that All Might could not be one of the people interrogating them, Namasa replied, giving his longtime friend an apologetic look. So they were expecting him, Nezu nodded. It seems so, Namasa agreed. In fact they said they'd be surprised as you weren't listening, and Toshinori, the blonde, simply narrowed his eyes at the implications. And the last thing. Namasa pulled out an envelope from his pocket and held it up. We found this on them, the detective explained. They said to bring it unopened. And you did, Night-Eye wondered. You just listened to a bunch of villains, Namasa frowned at the man's words. Now let's not assume anything about them, Nezu intervened. They haven't been branded as of yet, so there's still time. They're associated with him, Night-Eye pointed out. And he hasn't been branded as one either, Nezu easily countered. Night-Eye frowned at the principal but didn't say anything else. Meanwhile Toshinori opted to remain silent, leaving his opinion to himself. Besides, I did the initial questioning, and my quirk rang true when they said it wasn't dangerous, Namasa explained. Plus we ran it through multiple spectrometers and they couldn't pick up anything. I suppose that'll have to do, Night-Eye sighed. Let's begin, shall we? Nezu clapped, and Namasa opened the door allowing them in. Inside the room were two teenagers who were currently quit hogging all of them, the male teenager shouted as he reached for the plate. Mine, the female teenager denied as she slid the plate away and stuffed another cookie in her face. They were for the table. But they were put closer to me, therefore they are mine, the girl argued with her strange logic. They're not even your favorite kind, so why are you? The boy stopped as he seemed to realize they were no longer alone in the room. I think we have company. The girl seemed to freeze in her movements as well as the two of them were stared down by the three men. One with a look of exasperation, one with clear irritation, and the last one with amusement in his eyes. Did you want some? The girl asked intelligently. Perhaps later, Nezu smiled. With a fresh batch, the animal added, pulling out a new batch of cookies from somewhere. The girl's eyes sparkled and looked ready to go for them before remembering her hands and feet were cuffed. After a moment of shuffling, the three men took seats across from the two teens. One might think it was overkill, however these men weren't after the two people in front of them. Rather someone they were associated with. Namasa pulled out a photo, placed it on the table, and slid it towards the two teens. The FFT, the girl nearly spit out her cookie while the boy choked on his laughter as they looked at the photo. Oh my gosh, she squealed. I'm sorry, but can we get a copy of that photo? The boy asked between his snickering looking at the photo. So they don't deny they know him, Nezu noted at their reaction. He is a person of interest in quite a few cases, Namasa continued once the two calmed down. Once he was sure they were fully with him again, he began pulling out the files he had brought in. The siege on Hosu, Namasa began as he laid down a file with a picture of a city in chaos. The island takeover, he laid out another photo to show a futuristic city. Well, if you didn't count a destroyed amusement park or crumbled building in the center. Camino Ward, yet another file was laid down, this time with a picture of a giant crater in the middle of the city. Man, they have a lot of pictures of him, the boy muttered. And every time he just so happened to show up, Namasa continued. Looking at the people across from him. With reports of you two being with him. Would you believe me if I said right place wrong time? The girl let out an awkward chuckle. In most cases, yeah, Namasa admitted. Well, island may be pushing it considering how hard it is to get on the island, it's not impossible with an invitation, the detective continued. Then again, you didn't have one, did you? We can neither confirm nor deny that, the boy spoke that time. I'm sure, Night Eye growled. Like I said, these incidents could be chalked up to coincidence, even if island is pushing it, and you two would be charged with basic vigilantism along with him, Namasa began again before his face became more serious. However, these cannot, he said as he laid out another file. The image of a black creature with an exposed brain. A USJ, yet another file, this one of a forest that was partially on fire. The fact the fire was blue only added to how serious the situation was. The UA camp, and then he laid down another file. This one of an island. Namasa finished and he watched as the two teens' eyes lingered on the last photo the most. Unlike the other photos, the place looked to be in one piece, no clear signs of destruction. But they knew better and Namasa couldn't blame them. While he only had eyewitness accounts, he was aware that these two knew of what had occurred on that island. According to the eyewitness account. Hell. And in this one you were clearly seen as the instigator, yet another file, this one with a picture of a grotesque monster with multiple arms and a dark miasma surrounding it. At this picture the prisoner's laid back and childish disposition disappeared. Kisaki, the boy growled the name with such vitriol and hate it almost made Namasa take a step back. Your reaction is indeed warranted, Nezu finally spoke. His actions were deplorable. Understatement, the girl hissed. Agreed, Nezu smiled. But I'd rather keep my exact thoughts on the man and his machinations to myself, lest I let certain emotions consume me. Fair enough, the male prisoner nodded in agreement. The less I think about him the better. Indeed, which reminds me, Nezu asked. Where is his daughter? She's not his daughter, the boy spat, his anger reignited. His companion placed a hand on his shoulder and the two locked eyes. She gave him a serene smile and after a moment he returned it. Sorry. It's quite alright, Nezu reassured. Your reaction is very much warranted. She's safe, the girl answered honestly. And we're supposed to believe you because Night Eye accused. In truth, they already had the answer because of Namasa's quirk, but he was attempting to make the teens uneasy. If they were uneasy, then they would be easier to crack. Last time I saw her she was denying that she had eaten a whole tray of apple dumplings, the boy let out a small chuckle. With her accomplice, he added, pointing his thumb lazily at the girl with him. You can't prove it was us, the girl squeaked. There were crumbs smeared all across your faces and hands, the boy deadpanned. This time Nezu joined in on the chuckle. Namasa decided to add that his quirk rang out as lie from the girl. She gave me that look, with big innocent eyes and quivering lip, the girl cooed. It was so adorable. You mean the one you taught her? I plead the fifth, she offered with a cheeky smile. You didn't even know what that meant until I told you, the boy snapped. As entertaining as this is, Night Eye growled, stopping few banter before it could begin in earnest. Can we get back to the questioning? Well, actually before that, the boy spoke before looking over at Namasa. Did you bring the letter? Namasa nodded. It's for Nezu, the girl answered. The three eyed each other, but Nezu gave a nod. Namasa handed the letter over to the animal, who took it with eagerness and opened it. The men relaxed when no airborne substance appeared. With that out of the way, Nezu pulled out a small piece of paper and opened it. What Nezu saw made his grin grow even wider. Knight to C6, I believe that's check. Intriguing, Nezu nodded before looking back at the teens. When was it you saw the young girl last, if I may ask? The two looked at each other and held identical mischievous smiles. Technically that was day after tomorrow, the girl said with a smirk, and Nezu didn't think his grin couldn't get any bigger. His eyes flicked over to Namosa, who looked perplexed at the answer because his quirk rang the answer as true. Apparently it could. What an interesting sentence and letter, Nezu said with a clap. It actually brings up a few other files. There are more, the boy seemed truly surprised at that. Indeed, Nezu nodded, holding up a couple files. And these ones are what piqued my interest the most, he explained, placing one down. It showed one of him with a high school girl with long blue and pink hair. Another of him with a masked high school girl with bunny ears and another masked man with wild red hair. Nezu eyed the two and saw the girl had a look of recognition of the girl in the first photo. Meanwhile, the boy looked at the second photo and his eye twitched. Wanna know what's so interesting about these two in particular? I have a hunch you're gonna tell us, the boy said. They're from years ago, Nezu clapped once again. And yet somehow he looks the exact same age in all of them. The two looked at each other briefly before going back to the conversation. But you two are interesting in itself, Nezu continued. See, I reached out to some international contacts, and I found that as far as the world is concerned neither of you have ever existed, the principal explained. Though I do have some theories. So if we don't exist, then doesn't that technically mean we can go, the boy wondered. Well, we did manage to get your names, Nezu countered. Oh, the girl tilted her head in curiosity. But if we don't exist, how can you be sure there are names, she said cheekily. Or how we can be sitting across from you. Oh, do you need a lesson in human reproduction, Nezu asked with a smirk. Nope, the boy denied. We're not about to have the birds and the bees talk. The boy questioned with a look of horror in his eyes. Please don't, the girl blushed. I'd rather not go through that again. I don't think it covers miraculous births like yours, Nezu responded. I believe it's time we cut too, the chaste Night-Eye interrupted with a look of irritation. Very well, Nezu sighed, disappointed at his fun being cut short. I believe we should start with the most important one, Namasa pointed out. Indeed, Nezu nodded before looking at the two teens in front of him. So, he said, looking the two teens in the eye. He looked at the boy first. Miles Morales. The boy quirked an eyebrow as his lips raised in a small smile. His eyes moved over to the girl. Ruby rose. The girl blinked owlishly as she took a bite out of a cookie. A small grin on her face. Seriously, this picture was perfect for this scene. Nezu leaned in close with a gleam in his eye as he looked into their defiant and guarded eyes. He slid the photo of their companion and he watched as their eyes zeroed in on it. Then he asked a question. Where is Midoriya Izuku? Save her. Izuku Midoriya looked into the sunken blue eyes of the man that had been his idol as he answered the question he had so desperately needed an answer to. All Might looked at Izuku with a serious face. He began to speak. Izuku woke up with a start. He took in a deep breath as his eyes frantically searched his surroundings before letting out a sigh. He was back in his room. That dream again, the green-haired teen sighed. Then without much more preamble he pushed himself out of bed because he knew if he didn't, he wouldn't have wanted to get up at all. But he had to. He had things to do today. After a few stretches he grabbed his backpack and made his way to his door. He stopped briefly before looking around at the barren walls and surfaces. Signs of things having been there being obvious. I really need to put something new up, he muttered before walking out. He grabbed the mail and went through them. As expected, there were notices for overdue bills, as well as a few things for his mom. Then he got to the last letter and felt his eyes widen. He placed the rest of the mail onto the table and quickly ripped open the one he had been looking for and scanned through the letter. Sadly, the more he read, the more depressed he got. Finally, he finished the last sentence and let out a sigh. Should have expected that, he said sadly before throwing the letter away. After a quick and quiet breakfast he made his way out in the world. Something he was relieved for. Staying in the apartment was hard to do. He walked through the city of Mustafu to begin his day, the first destination in his mind. However, before he could get there was an explosion. Izuku himself let out a sigh as he realized what was happening. He knew he should go another way to avoid it. But. Can't help what you love, right? He chuckled mirthlessly as he made his way towards the chaos. Now some of you may be wondering what would cause a young teen to run towards an explosion. Well, besides adolescent curiosity. You see, Izuku lives in a very special time. 200 years ago a glowing baby was born glowing. Soon after, many infants were showing signs of abilities unseen by man until that day and only seen in books and television. These abilities came to be known as quirks and they changed the way society worked. Soon everything began to revolve around quirks, sports, business, entertainment and more. But after a while it soon led to an age thought to only live in entertainment. The age of heroes. How dare you attack an old lady, a buff man with giant arms shouted as he ran after someone. Just leave me alone, hero, a man shouted, throwing meteors at the attacking hero. F arms, huh, Izuku said, staying near the back of the crowd. Wonder if he would remember me, he muttered, recalling the last time he had run into the hero. Izuku certainly hoped he didn't. The last time they had met had not been pleasant for the green-haired teen. Izuku watched the chase with a despondent but analytical eye. Why doesn't he just punch through them, Izuku muttered. He could do that to push through the flames to attack the villain head-on instead of this cat and mouse game. His keen eyes moved over to the person he was chasing. He's shooting off balls of dirt surrounded in fire, making them look like meteors, so it's still something solid. F arms should have more than enough power to destroy them with ease. Then again, he had seen the same hero hesitate when it came to fire before. Izuku felt his mind drift to a few months ago to what could only be called one of the worst days of his life. The day had started out much like this one. He had woken up and his mom was making breakfast. After eating, he ran out the door to make his way to school. On the way he had witnessed a hero-villain fight, as well as the debut for a new hero calling herself Mount Lady. After her posing, Izuku had made his way to school. Sadly, the teacher decided to let everyone know he wanted to try out for UA. They laughed. He had expected it. Sadly, Kakin had taken exception to that. After a beatdown during morning break and lunch, in the bathroom, Kakin decided to blow up his hero analysis notebook. Then he told him to kill himself. Then he got beaten up again. After finally escaping his school, he made his way home only to be attacked by a villain made of sludge who tried to kill him. Thankfully, he was saved by All Might. All Might, the #1 hero as well as Izuku's favorite hero. Then he got the chance to ask the question that had plagued him for years. He had asked. Swoosh. Izuku was brought out of his musing just in time to see Death Arms smack one of the meteors that got too close to him. Sadly, the swing had been wild, which caused the flaming ball to go in a random direction. Izuku's eyes trailed the meteor's trajectory and where it was going. Straight towards an unsuspecting child playing with a ball. Izuku was moving before he even realized it. His feet beat against the street as he sprinted towards the child, trying to outrun the attack. With a shout, he leapt forward, tackling the child in an embrace, but turning so that Izuku would take the brunt of the fall. Smash. Just in time as the meteor landed right where the boy had been. Made it, Izuku sighed as he looked down at the child who was looking up at him in awe. Be careful out there, he smiled. The child simply looked at him with big eyes of wonder. Izuku chuckled before looking up to see a man and woman looking around frantically. Come on, let's get you home, he said, hefting himself up and taking the child's hand and walking towards his parents. Once they were a few feet away, Izuku nudged him forward. Go on, the boy looked back at Izuku once again, and Izuku gave him a smile. Go be with your family, the boy smiled up at Izuku and gave him a hug which surprised Izuku before he returned it. Then the boy ran towards his parents who looked so happy to see him. Best feeling ever, Izuku sighed with a smile. His eyes moved over to where he could see Death Arms smiling as he stood over the person he had been chasing. The people were praising him for his actions. For a brief moment Izuku had to wonder how they would feel if they found out he had almost gotten a kid killed. But just as soon as it appeared, it was repressed. With one last sigh, Izuku turned around and went back to his day. So focused he didn't notice a pair of eyes following him. I knew it, the voice of the eyes smiled. Later. Izuku looked up at the door with a bit of trepidation. He had stood in front of this door multiple times in the past few months, so he should be used to it by now. But he never could. He could never get used to what was awaiting him on the other side of this door. The day for sure, he noted, trying to hype himself up for what was waiting for him on the other side of this door. He took in one last deep breath and opened the door. He slowly walked forward and took note of what was in the room. Not today either, he thought. Then with a familiar pep he made his way forward. With a small smile he spoke. Hey mom. Hope your day's been good, Izuku said with a soft smile. Better than mine at least. Sadly no job wanted to hire me, Izuku admitted. The price of being quirkless, right? Indeed. Izuku was quirkless. Which meant he had no powers. In a world where 80% of the population, Izuku was amongst the 20% that didn't. Something society didn't let him forget. You rejected my application, he spoke softly. I'm welcome to join general studies, but I'm barred from taking the hero course exam. All his life he only wanted to do one thing, and now he was being told that he couldn't because he didn't have a quirk. In fact, this rule was passed for all hero schools. No quirk, no hero course. He had looked into it in between his job interviews, and indeed every single hero course forbade the participation of quirkless students per the HSPC. As usual, the world is doing its best to reject me, Izuku said. But as long as I have you and my dream, I know it's worth fighting against, he said with a small smile. So please, I need you to wake up mom, Izuku whispered as tears began to leak from his eyes. As usual, his mother did not respond. The breathing mask on her face fogged from her breath hitting it as she laid in the hospital bed unmoving. The monitor's constant beeping being the only sound to comfort Izuku in knowing she was alive. Inko Midoriya had been caught in a hero and villain fight about 3 months ago. She had been coming from work when a fight broke out. By all accounts it should have been an easy fight for the hero. Sadly, said hero decided it was more important to show off instead of subduing the villain immediately. In doing so, one of the villain's stray attacks had hit a nearby gas pipe that Inko had been close to. She had taken a nasty hit to the head and suffered from second-degree burns. Thankfully the doctors had been able to heal her up, but sadly she had yet to wake up. Sadly for Izuku, the world did not stop moving for him. Bills kept coming in and the money Inko had saved up was running dry. He had reached out to his father but never got an answer. Something he fully expected, but it still hurt. Masaru and Mitsuki Bakugo, Kakin's parents, had offered to pay off the apartment and let Izuku live with them, but he knew that would be a bad idea. Kakin was unbearable at school. He didn't want to imagine what it would be like living with him. He had politely turned them down and said he would be fine. It was clear neither of them liked it, and Mitsuki had made it clear that if things got bad for him, he would be living with them. The glare she had sent to Kitsuki at those words also made it clear he had no say in the matter. Haken had been sure to let Izuku know he was displeased with the whole situation. Izuku let out a sigh as he realized that might be his only option. He couldn't just run through the rest of the money his mom left, or else things would be bad when not if, he would never think if his mom woke up. He should be able to survive living with Kaken for a few weeks. Hopefully. With one last sigh Izuku pulled out his phone and began to type in Aunt Mitsuki's number. Save her. Izuku looked up as the words rammed into his mind. He looked around to see where the voice was coming from, but couldn't find the origin. The phone in his hand forgotten. Save her. Izuku stood up abruptly as he frantically looked around trying to figure out what was going on. Hello? He called nervously. Is anyone there? He received no answer, but quickly found himself moving outside the room. He got ready to call for the nurse but then. Save her. Izuku groaned as the voice called again. However, before he could properly freak out he found himself moving again, walking with a purpose. He didn't know why, but something was telling him to follow the path he was seeing in his mind. Soon the path he was following led him outside and away from the hospital. By the time he realized what he was doing he found himself standing in front of an alley in the middle of a busy sidewalk. It wasn't anything impressive, and he could clearly see the exit on the other side, leading to a less busy street than he was on. Hello, Izuku called nervously, looking into the dark corridor. What had compelled him to come here? And what had been that voice? Was it the result of a quirk? But why? Who was the girl he needed to save? These questions came to a screeching halt as he looked up in time to see something came into his sights. It was two men walking past the alley on the other side. Nothing about them was significant minus the masks and hoods. Nothing are of the ordinary in this quirky world. Quirky get it. However, they weren't what had Isaac's focus. No, that responsibility belonged to the little girl between them. The one that had looked at him and made eye contact with the teen. And within those eyes Izuku saw many things. So many horrible things. Pain, fear, heartbreak, sadness, loneliness and so much more. But above all that he saw something else. A whispered plea that might as well have been as loud as an explosion. Help me. For the second time that day Izuku was moving before he realized what he was doing. Rushing forward through the alley in hopes of catching up to them. However, he didn't get far. About halfway through the alleyway it happened. A door leading to absolutely nowhere opened in front of him. Unfortunately his momentum had been too great and he had no time to stop himself. Izuku could do nothing as he went through the door leading to absolutely nowhere and disappeared from the world. That's one, someone smiled. Ruby Rose let out a soft groan as she finished the last of her morning stretches. With a sigh she looked up ready to begin the day. She made her way out of her room to go about grooming herself before pausing to look at a closed door. She lingered there for a moment before sighing and going about her day, leaving the door closed. Just like it had been for some time. After brushing her teeth, a nice shower and the rest of her morning preparations, she walked down the stairs. Her stomach growled, but she ignored it for now since she was on her way to get something to eat. Arf. She looked down and smiled at the sight of a dog looking up at her. Morning's way, she greeted, scratching the small dog's head. The last companion in the house with her. That wasn't to say Ruby loved alone or anything, it was just. Ruby shook her head as she stopped her mind from wandering to places she didn't want it to go to right now. Although she would have no choice but to deal with one of them in a moment as she headed towards the door. The house was silent as she walked through it. She took a look at the kitchen and for a brief moment she thought about making breakfast instead of going out. That's not too, Ruby mumbled. She already knew she would be the only one to eat it. Something made clear to her to the dinner plate she had left on the table still wrapped up. She would probably have to dump it when she got home as the contents will have gone bad by then. After making sure Zwei had food and water in his bowl and that the dog door to the back. I'm heading out, Ruby said softly, looking over at her father. The alcohol on his breath was clear to her all the way from where she was standing. She reached for the doorknob but paused before opening the door. I love you, she called. He didn't respond, he rarely did these days. She blinked a couple times, preventing her eyes from watering before opening the door and going out into the world. After making her way into town and having a quick breakfast at one of her favorite bakeries, the silver-eyed girl headed towards the request board. Looks like she's heading towards the request board again. Didn't she just complete one yesterday? Is she even allowed to do that? She's 15. Someone has to bring in the money. Yang still hasn't gotten off his ass yet, I take it. Poor girl. All around her the whispers persisted, but she ignored them. It was true, due to her father being indisposed of as he was, no one was bringing in any income. Crow would send in part of his earnings from his missions, but since they were usually long-running ones, the checks were far in between. So to help Ruby went and got a job. Huntsman quests. Technically she wasn't supposed to be doing them since she wasn't an official huntress. Hell was still only in a primary academy, not one of the official ones. She wouldn't be able to enter one of those for another 2 years. However, with tensions high between the kingdoms and the increase in Grim activity everywhere, no one wanted to mention the possibility that the Grim were reacting to the hostile emotions the kingdoms were having towards each other. Huntsmen were spread thin. And Patch was a rather small island, so huntsmen were usually off the island. Add her home life into the mix, and it was rather easy for Ruby to convince her teachers and a few city officials to let her take requests. Ruby didn't like being pitied, but she would take advantage of those feelings in this instance, as it kept the lights on and put food on the table. It also kept alcohol in her dad's hands, but she ignored this detail. So when Ruby grabbed a grim clearing quest in the East Forests, no one so much as blinked. "Are you a huntress?" Ruby looked down to see a child looking up at her with awe and wonder. Ruby let out a gentle smile and looked down at the boy. "Not just yet," Ruby answered honestly with a smile. "But I will be soon." "Cool," the child smiled with stars in his eyes, causing her to giggle. "I can't wait to be a great huntsman," Ruby cooed at the child's awe before slowly standing back up. "Make sure you train and do what's best for you first," Ruby answered honestly. "And always hold up huntsman dignity and you'll do great." "Okay, miss." Ruby gave a thumbs up to the kid before ruffling their hair and walking off. Only to pause mid-step. "But," Ruby said lowly looking back at the child. "Also remember to come back to those you care about." The child tilted their head in confusion at her words. "Because if you don't they'll be sad." "I don't want that," the child protested. "I know you don't, so remember to come back," Ruby smiled. "I will," the child chirped. With her final piece said, Ruby gave one last wave of goodbye and turned back to head towards the woods. "No blind faith," a voice said with a smile. "Good. Remember to always come back, huh?" Ruby sighed as she entered the general area of the quest location. Thankfully she didn't have to search long, for in front of her stood a pack of beelds. "Let's do this," Ruby whispered as she stared down the beelf pack who were glaring back. "Nothing you haven't done before," which was very true. This had become her life. "Why couldn't you do the same thing, Mom?" Ruby whispered before taking off. Her mind reeling back to the day everything changed for her. To the day Uncle Crow came and spoke the words that damned her family. Ruby stood in the doorway with wide eyes. Her Uncle Crow stood on the other side of the threshold. Despite the rain pouring down on him, he made no move to enter the house. Surely she had misheard him. "What?" Ruby whispered. "I'm sorry, Ruby," Crow whispered, the rain disguising his tears. "Your mom's not coming home." Ruby could hear Yang screaming for him to stop lying as she rammed herself into Crow, beating on his chest. The man made no move to stop her as she continued hitting him. Tai Yang, her father, had placed his hands on her shoulders and was whispering something to her. But whatever was being said and whatever Yang was screaming was muffled under the ringing in her heart. That had been 4 years ago. Nothing had been the same since. Crow's already distant visits had grown even more distant. Her father had fallen into a funk and had never really recovered. Sure, he was still there for his daughters, but they could tell it wasn't the same. Ruby fired off another shot, blowing off the head of one of the beels. The rest of the pack continued, not even stopping to check on their dead companion. Not that they needed to, since his body dissipated soon after. Ruby fired off shot after shot, taking out as many as she could before they got to close. In this rather miserable life she at least thought she had her sister to support her. And in turn she would support Yang. Sure, they had different moms, but that didn't mean anything to Ruby. Yang was Yang and Yang was her sister. It was as simple as that. If there was anyone that would always have her back, it would be her sister. Those feelings came to a screeching halt when Ruby had gone to her sister's room to wake up to find she was gone. Ruby let out a sigh as she bisected a beelf coming to her right. From her peripheral she spotted an Ursa charging at her. With practiced ease she aimed her scythe behind her and fired. The resulting shot sent her flying right at the Grim and past it. However, her scythe caught the unsuspecting creature and cut it down the middle before it could scream. No note, no phone call, not so much as a goodbye. In the same fashion that her mom had left, Yang disappeared from her life. That seemed to be the straw to break the camel's back. Her father had completely lost himself in the bottle after Yang had disappeared. If there was any part of the man who had tucked her in growing up and had done his best to take care of her, it was drowned in all of the alcohol. That had been 2 years ago. Ruby ducked under a swipe before swinging crescent rows around, knocking the Grim in front of her away. She looked around quickly, taking note of how many more of them were left. Too many to count. The odds were very much against her. Nothing she wasn't used to. With a shout she charged back into the fray. For all Ruby knew, Yang was dead. Her uncle's Crow's visits could be counted on one hand and there would still be fingers left over. His longest visit had been nice, he had helped her forge crescent rows and showed her a few of his tricks. He told her to keep practicing and she dutifully had. Then he was off on another mission. She hadn't heard from him in 7 months. RWBY skidded to a halt before looking up at the remaining Grim. It was time to end this. With practiced ease, RWBY replaced the magazine in her weapon with another one. She took a steady breath. Then she launched. She was upon the first one in an instant, cutting it down before moving on to the second and third, taking them out with just as much ease before launching towards the next one. Little by little, everyone that had said they would always be there for her had abandoned her. One by one they all left her for unknown reasons. And RWBY was left with the question. Why? She cut down 2 more before using her semblance to take another one by surprise. Why did Mom not tell anyone her mission? Hack. Why did Yang say nothing? Slash. Why couldn't Uncle Crow stay around more often? Bam. Why did her dad not see her? Swing. Why did her family have to fall apart? Slash, hack, bang, swing, bash, slice, on and on. The slaughter went before soon enough, RWBY was the last living thing in the clearing. All around her the limbs of the Grim began dissipating until there was nothing left but bullet shells to litter the forest floor. After taking in a few more breaths and calming down, she did one last sweep and found that she was indeed the only thing left in the area. Mission cleared, RWBY stated before making her way back to town. From there she would turn in the quest and receive her payment tomorrow. Just in time to pay the electric bill. Save her. RWBY instantly held up Crescent Rose in sniper mode, ready to fire it off. Her eyes scanned the area looking for wherever the voice had come from. Save her. She was caught off guard at the second call as it sounded like it came from behind her. So startled she ended up stumbling, but just before she could catch her balance her foot fell further than it shouldn't have. RWBY looked at the ground to see her foot falling into a hole that led to absolutely nowhere. So caught off at the very much unnatural thing below she didn't even try to escape it with her semblance, which would prove to be a mistake. RWBY couldn't even scream before the hole that led to absolutely nowhere swallowed her up, taking her somewhere unknown. One more to go. Miles Morales was not having a good time. Shouldn't be surprised though, he thought as he looked around the destroyed area. It had been his 3rd night out as Spider-No as a vigilante, and he just happened to see a man steal a car. Seemed simple enough. Jump onto the car, knock the man out and stop the car. Simple, right? It most certainly was not. True, he had managed to catch the bad guy, but it had only been to sheer dumb luck. And the property damage he had caused had not been pretty. But he thought it would be alright, he just needed some practice. He remembered reading about Spider-Man's early days, and they had been just as bad. Plus he thought people would appreciate seeing someone taking up the mantle of their city's hero. They most certainly did not. The crowd of civilians had stormed over to him in what he mistook for excitement. He realized it was rage when one of them had taken a swing at him. "You will never be Spider-Man, so hang it up and stop disrespecting his memory." The man hissed at him before the group collectively walked away. Of course he wasn't Spider-Man, he knew that better than anyone. He could never be Spider-Man. After all, he was the boy that had killed him in the first place. It had been the day after he was bitten. He had gone through the changes. A growth spurt, increase in strength, overstimulated senses. He thought he was sick and then he had to go and rip that girl's hair out. Oh, that had not been good. He still owed that girl an apology. Despite that, he had taken it all in relative stride and chalked it up to puberty. Then he stuck himself to a wall. That had raised some alarm bells in his head. After a brief moment of running up the walls outside his school and managing to find some fitting clothes, he made his way back to the abandoned station his uncle had shown him. That's where he saw it. The spider that had bitten him. Despite how he acted sometimes, Miles wasn't an idiot, far from it in fact. There was a reason he was at Vision's Academy as much as he hated it. Getting bit by a spider and suddenly developing abilities similar to Spider-Man, yeah, it wasn't hard to put 2 and 2 together. All the signs were there. He just couldn't be sure unless he talked to the web hero himself. Thankfully he didn't have to wait long. Quite literally, as the web slinger came flying through a wall with Green Goblin and accidentally dragging him along. After more or less witnessing a fight between titans in his eyes, he got his chance. Granted, it was because he was falling to his death, but still. Then his senses went off and he could somehow tell that he wasn't the only one. "You're like me," it had been said simultaneously as Miles looked at the red mask of the friendly neighborhood hero. "I thought I was the only one," the man whispered. "I didn't want this," Miles said softly. "I know," Spider-Man said, and Miles could tell he was giving him a reassuring smile. "I didn't either." "Then why did you?" Miles had asked. "Why become a hero?" "I didn't do this to be a hero," Spider-Man answered honestly. "You don't have to do what I do if you don't want to." "I don't?" Miles asked, surprised. "Not at all," Spider-Man chuckled. "Lord knows I don't." "Then why?" Miles asked again, and slowly Spider-Man looked at him and Miles could feel something radiating off of him. Something that washed over Miles and wrapped around him like a warm blanket. "Because with great power comes great responsibility." Something clicked for Miles in that moment. Something that had felt like he had been missing for a long time. He couldn't explain why, but in that moment everything just felt right. Sadly, it all went so wrong soon after. After reassuring him that everything would be okay and that he would show him how to use his abilities when they got out of here, Spider-Man got back to being a hero. Miles did his best to get to safety, but he couldn't help but be awestruck at the battle taking place in front of him. At the end it seemed like Goblin had the advantage, but that turned into his downfall as his actions caused a collider to explode, destroying everything in the vicinity. Once the smoke cleared, Goblin was dead and Spider-Man was partially buried under a pile of rocks. Clearly injured and out of it, Miles needed to help him. "Don't worry, kid," the man said with a solemn smile. "It's all gonna be fine." "Don't worry, the green roses can be trusted," Spider-Man coughed out. "Just make sure to keep the unicorn safe from the plague." "Okay, maybe," the man was concussed. Miles got ready to grab the man, but stopped when they heard something nearby. "Go hide," Spider-Man ordered him. "But what about you?" "It'll be fine, kid." "Hey," the man lifted his mask, and Miles got a good look at the man who had been Spider-Man for years. The man gave him a kind smile before speaking. "You and your friends are gonna do great things." With that he placed the mask back down and shooed him away just in time for the villains to round the corner. Miles was still confused by the man's words, but chalked it up to the results of the concussion. He would make sure to get him some medical care when they got out of here. Sadly, that would not happen. He had been there. He had been right there and had won nothing. He could have done anything. He was super strong now, so he could have carried the man to safety. They were surrounded by rubble, so he could have hidden them away until the villains had left. He could have done something. But he didn't. No, instead he sat there hidden and watched as Spider-Man was killed by a villain. The Kingpin had slammed his heavy arms down onto the unprotected hero, most likely crushing his chest. The resulting attack had caused the floor beneath them to crumble, and Miles could only watch as Spider-Man fell into a dark hole with a large amount of debris to follow the body. He had never even learned the man's name. That's why Miles made no move to retort against the people that had ridiculed him. He had no right to. So with one last sigh he turned to walk away. Squeak. Miles paused to see he had stepped on a small bear. Slowly he picked it up before looking around to see a child looking at him with a sad look on their face. He smiled beneath the mask before picking up the bear and walking over to the child. "Best to keep this safe, right?" Miles said, kneeling down to look at the child who looked at him. He handed the drenched bear over, causing the child to instantly reach out for it. "Remember to clean them up properly so they don't get sick." The child gave a toothy grin before turning to running off. Miles gave one last smile before sighing and looking around, seeing it was time to leave. "I seriously need to get webs," Miles muttered. He had thought Spider-Man's webs were organic at first. The more he thought about it, the less that made sense. He had seen Hero electrocute people with webs, so they had to be chemically made. Something he could figure out later, he supposed. Assuming he was still gonna do this. "Might as well get my Parker skills right," Miles sighed as he bent his knees before taking a powerful leap through the air. And straight towards a window. "Crap," Miles shouted as he could do nothing but get ready to apologize to whoever lived in there. At least he would have had he not seen that the window lead into absolutely nowhere. What in the whatever else he was gonna say was cut off as Miles flew through the window that lead into absolutely nowhere. "Man, I didn't even get to send the message out on him," someone chuckled. "Are you sure about this?" someone else questioned. "Not at all," they answered honestly with a smile. "That does not inspire me with confidence," the second one answered honestly. "Hey, it'll be fine now, let's go introduce them," the first voice dismissed before disappearing. "Sigh that boy," the second voice sighed before following the first voice to the same destination. They had guests to greet. "You said you from where?" Izuku felt his body slam into a hard metallic surface as he went through the door from absolutely nowhere. He let out a groan from the pain that coursed through his body at the collision. "What just happened?" Izuku groaned as he slowly got up. Once he was able to recover, he quickly took in the fact that he was definitely not out on the streets anymore. From what Izuku could tell, he was in a rather large room without windows, preventing him from figuring out where he was. Not ideal, but it could be worse maybe. Before Izuku could properly panic, something slammed into the ground not too far from him. It was quickly revealed to be a person from the groan he heard. He turned to see Miles being the one to have arrived. "Well, that happened," Miles groaned, slowly getting up. Before Izuku could say anything, he heard yet another crash. "Ooh, my butt," a female voice whined. The voice was revealed to be RWBY. Izuku eyed the two strangers, not having seen them arrive much like he had. "Who are you?" Izuku asked, looking at the two teens in front of him. At his words, the other two instantly became more aware of their surroundings and began to look around. Once they realized they were not alone, all the teens backed away from each other with trepidation. Miles crouched down, looking ready to leap at a moment's notice. RWBY reached for Crescent Rose and took aim, her eyes moving between the two boys. Izuku put up a guard ready to defend himself. That's what I wanna ask, Miles countered looking at the two of them. His eyes mostly trained on the girl with a strange contraption in her hands. Same here, RWBY spoke. I was on my way home when that portal opened up under me and… Wait, portal, Miles interrupted. That appeared suddenly before you could react. Yeah, RWBY nodded lowering her weapon. Happened to me too, Miles admitted. Same, I had no time to react to it when it appeared, Izuku added. And it looked like it'd lead, Izuku began. Absolutely nowhere, all three of them looked up at each other, realizing they had said it at the same time. So I'm guessing that someone brought all three of us here, Izuku mumbled. Against our will, RWBY stated lowering her gun but keeping her finger near the trigger. Only in New York, Miles sighed. Is that where you're from? Izuku asked. Yeah, Miles answered since his mask was still on, he wasn't all that worried about his identity. From your looks I'm guessing you're from Japan. Izuku slowly nodded before seemingly debating something in his mind. I'm Midoriya Izuku, the other two looked at him understanding he was trying to show he was trustworthy. RWBY rose. Miles Morales, Miles added taking his mask off. And with everything I've learned from I'm guessing your first name is Izuku and last name is Midoriya. Yeah, Izuku nodded. So now that introductions are out of the way, RWBY smiled gently. I've never heard of New York or Japan, where are those places? Really? Miles asked surprised. One was the name of a country and while just a city New York was rather famous. For her to not have heard of either, where are you from? I'm from Patch, RWBY replied. It's a small island off the coast of the Kingdom of Vale. Vale? Izuku asked. Kingdom? Miles blinked. Where's that? Izuku asked. You don't know where Vale is? RWBY raised an eyebrow. Both boys shook their heads which only confused RWBY more. Deciding to change subjects Izuku took in Miles' outfit. It was clearly basic, but he recognized a hero costume when he saw one. And RWBY clearly had a weapon of sorts, maybe one that helped with her quirk. Maybe he could use this chance to venture into familiar territory. So that's a nice costume, Izuku began looking over at Miles. I'm guessing you two must be heroes in training, he continued. What type of quirks do you have? Quirk? Miles questioned. Before he could ask Izuku to elaborate, RWBY spoke up. You're training to be a hero, RWBY exclaimed with excitement. Yeah, Miles admitted. With that weapon of yours I'm guessing you're doing something similar. Huntress actually, RWBY admitted. I got 2 more years before I can apply to one of the academies. Though I already have experience fighting Grimm and using my semblance. Grimm? Izuku asked. Semblance? Miles added. You know creatures of the dark, RWBY explained offhandedly. She was met with confused stares. Never heard of it, Miles admitted. What about semblance, RWBY asked. Manifestation of one's soul and aura. Aura? Miles asked. Manifests from the soul, Izuku asked bewildered. How does that work? He asked writing in the notebook he had pulled from somewhere. RWBY eyed the two boys and took a step back from them. This was way too weird for her taste. Starting to regret taking up Spider-Man's job, Miles mumbled. Seriously, it was way too early to deal with weirdos like this. Then again they didn't seem like bad guys. Spider-Man? Izuku asked unfamiliar with the hero name. Yeah, Miles responded. Surprised you haven't heard of him. Pretty sure he saved Japan back in 2029. I don't recall. Wait, Izuku stopped before looking at Miles in shock. What year did you say? 2019, Miles raised a brow. It was only a couple years ago. You mean a couple centuries, Izuku corrected. Now it was Miles' turn to gape. Wait, what? Miles shouted. You're from the future. You're from the past, RWBY exclaimed, causing Miles and Izuku to look over at her. What year is it for you, RWBY? Izuku asked, completely afraid of the answer she was going to give. 4159, she answered with wide eyes looking between the two boys. Other boys' eyes looked ready to pop out of their faces. What, RWBY defended. You're from different times too. Yeah, by a couple hundred years, Miles countered. Not a couple thousand. Not my fault you're from times before the kingdoms. Wait, let's all CCC calm down, Izuku said, fighting off his stutter. He had been doing so good too. The other two thankfully took his words to heart, allowing themselves to take in the information and process it. So were we just pulled from across the timeline, Miles muttered before groaning. I am not equipped to deal with time travel. Who is? RWBY countered. Probably the Ultimates, Miles shrugged. They've dealt with it before. Who? RWBY asked before realizing everything Miles said. Wait, they have? As RWBY and Miles began to freak out again at the bombs being dropped, Izuku took a pause at all the information he had just received. Wait, Izuku muttered. 2019 was before the Shining Baby, he began pacing around, catching the other two's attention. His eyes turned to RWBY with a question. How long have these Grimm been around? Since the beginning, RWBY admitted with slight hesitation. I've never seen a Grim before, Izuku muttered. And her weapon is unlike anything I've ever seen. Meanwhile the name Spider-Man is unfamiliar to me, but the time frame he gave me mumble 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 mumble. Can you understand that? Miles asked looking over at RWBY. Nope, RWBY popped the P. You? Not a bit, Miles admitted. Thankfully it didn't last much longer. I think I know what's going on, Izuku began having finished his muttering. The other two teens looked up in surprise at his words. You do? RWBY questioned. Miles didn't say anything, but the look he was giving the green-haired teen showed that he was listening as well. Let's start with Miles and I, Izuku began. You said it was 2019 where you were from, and that's close to the time around quirks began emerging according to the history books. 2021, actually, Miles corrected. And since you said history book, I guess you really are from the future. In a sense, Izuku admitted. It's the 23rd century where I'm from. But? Miles asked because it was clear Izuku had something to add. But the first sign of anyone with a superpower was the glowing baby, Izuku answered. Before then everyone was quirkless and there were no known heroes until the third generation of quirks, Izuku finished, and Miles' eyes widened as he began to understand the implications Izuku was leading up to. However, before he could say anything Izuku turned his attention towards RWBY. Now it could be argued that your time is in the far future, he admitted. However, from the way that you describe it, everyone has the same type of ability with the only difference being in their semblances. That's right, RWBY nodded. And these semblances do not have any signs of hereditary but are unique to the individual. For the most part, RWBY admitted. The only one I know of to be hereditary would be the Schnee glyphs which function the exact same way. Right, Izuku nodded. Whereas quirks create combinations when combined which are passed down to the child, he continued. And you say Grimm have been around since the beginning, but I have never seen or heard of a Grimm, have you, Miles? Not once, Miles admitted as his mind began turning gears leading to a conclusion he was sure Izuku was getting to. While there are some similarities there are too many differences to consider them as a timeline, Izuku spoke. Leading it to the alternative. Which is? RWBY asked although she was also starting to see where this was going. She had read too many comics not to come to the conclusion she knew the other two had come to. I think, Izuku began. We're from different times in different dimensions. He had said it. The idea that they all thought only lived in fantasy. Behind the covers of comics and theoretical papers written by scientists. And in this moment for the three teens it was proving to become a part of their reality. Correct, a new voice boomed causing the three teens to jump in shock. They all looked around before hearing footsteps approaching. The three turned to see a teen around their age walking towards them. Sorry for all the trouble, the teen smiled. Name's Zero. Zero? Izuku questioned. Zero corrected. The three blinked as they looked at each other warily. Isn't that what he said? Miles asked. He said it with a Z, Zero explained. However, it's with a X. What's the difference? RWBY asked with a raised eyebrow. The X is cooler, Zero exclaimed with a smile. I get it, Miles nodded with a shrug. I knew you would, Zero laughed. That's enough, Zero. Another one, the three teens thought simultaneously as they heard a mature feminine voice. Just getting to know them, Xena, Zero chuckled as the other voice revealed themselves to be an adult woman who looked. Oh, Izuku thought as a blush crossed his face. Damn, Miles thought, thankful his skin prevented him from blushing. RWBY simply looked at the woman with a slightly tilted head. I'm sure, Xena smiled before turning her focus on the three teens. In doing so the three of them instantly felt the need to straighten up and look presentable before her. Greetings. Hi, Izuku waved. Hello, RWBY greeted. Ahem, Miles cleared his throat before following his uncle's advice. Hey, he greeted with a smile. This caused the other two to look at him in confusion. The FFT Zero laughed behind his hands. Xena gave Zero a look and he held up his hands in surrender. Although from his expression he was clearly holding in his laughter. Anyways, Xena began, it is a pleasure to meet you all. Wish it was under better circumstances, but Zero trailed off giving a shrug that said, what can you do? At least we don't have to worry about the language barrier. At that the three of them looked confused. You know, so you can all understand each other. At that the three of them blinked in realization. Oh, you didn't realize that one yet, Zero chuckled. My bad. Who are you people exactly? RWBY asked, trying to get back on the main subject. And why had you brought us here? All will be revealed in time, Xena answered kindly. All you need to know for now is that I'm the one who sent that message, Zero replied, pointing to himself. Message? Izuku asked. To save her, Zero finished, causing RWBY and Izuku to look up in alarm. That was you, the two said simultaneously. I didn't get a message, Miles said looking confused. You didn't? Xena blinked before looking over at Zero, who refused to look at her. Zero. He jumped away before I could, Zero defended. I didn't want to send it to him while he was in mid-air, he added. But opening the portal in front of him was okay while he was mid-air. Well yeah, Zero answered honestly. It was funnier. Excuse me, Miles grunted. Hey, it all worked out in the end, Zero shrugged. So, let's get this show on the road, Xena looked at the boy with a look before sighing. Xena shook her head as she held out her hand. We have a task for all of you, Xena said as a picture appeared in her palm that she held up for them to see. It was a picture of a young girl, a girl that one of them was familiar with. It's her, Izuku said. You know her? RWBY asked. Not really, Izuku admitted. She's from my world, I saw her briefly before I was transported here, Izuku inched to the image slowly. She looked like she needed help. Indeed, Xena nodded. Her name is Eerie, and she is in grave danger. Danger? Miles asked. What kind of danger? Xena looked over at Zero who only nodded. With one last sigh she looked back at the three of them before speaking once again. This girl is being hurt by a horrible man, Xena began. Your task is to rescue her and find her someplace safe, the woman explained. Now the task is daunting so I'll do it. Zero and Xena looked up to see three fierce gazes at them. Gone were the nervous and awkward teens they had met only a few minutes ago. In their place stood three people filled with determination and courage. Ready to help someone in need. I knew it, Zero grinned looking over at Xena knowingly. Xena simply let out yet another sigh, but gave a small smile of her own. Very well, Xena nodded. Once you've done this, we will bring you back here and take you back to your respective homes. Unfortunately, we can't help you or else I'd be going down there with you, Zero grunted clearly unhappy with the situation. However, his frown soon gave way to a bright smile. But I have absolute faith you three can do this. The three teens looked amongst each other with a bit of trepidation. They didn't actually know each other in any capacity. In fact they had just met each other a few minutes ago. However they did have one thing in common. They all wanted to be heroes. Something they had revealed during their conversation. So just maybe they could trust each other for this. After a moment they all nodded to each other in a silent agreement before looking back at Zero and Xena. We're ready, Izuku spoke. Not just yet, Zero said before holding out a couple things to Izuku and RWBY. The two looked skeptically before reaching out and grabbing them. Izuku was given a dark green hoodie and mask. RWBY was simply given a mask. Need a way to keep your identities hidden, Zero explained as he looked over at Miles. You already have one so nothing for you. And this, Xena waved her hand and suddenly the three of them were wearing watches. What are these for? RWBY asked. If you press the button on the side they will open up a portal which will bring you back here. That's convenient, Miles chuckled. It's a one-time use so be careful with it. That inconvenient, RWBY mumbled. We'll drop you off near where you need to go, but after that you're on your own, Xena explained. Anything else you can tell us? Izuku asked. Not much I'm afraid, Xena admitted. What we can tell you is that it's only goons there, Zero explained. Goons? Miles asked. What about the boss? It just so happens he had an important meeting today and took all his executives with him, Zero explained. But you should assume they're coming back at any time so time is not on your side. Not liking the odds here, Miles admitted. We can do this, Izuku said determinedly. We'll just come up with a proper plan and we can get through this. That's the spirit, Zero cheered. Now are you all ready? The three seemed to check over themselves for a moment before nodding. Good, Zero exclaimed clapping his hands. This action caused a portal leading to absolutely nowhere to appear beneath them. They all looked down at the portal then back at Zero. Then the portal then Zero. They got ready to shout, but they fell through the portal which promptly closed after them leaving Zero and Xena in the room. Was that necessary? Xena asked. No, but it was funny, Zero admitted as his eyes looked over at Xena. I tooled Yahoo, he smirked. You did, Xena admitted. However, none of it will matter if they fail. They won't, Zero denied. They can do it. Do you think that's entirely a good thing? Xena questioned. Considering what we're going to ask of them should they succeed. Considering it's the only option I was given I don't have much of a choice, Zero pointed out. True, Xena conceded. You already pushed it with what you gave them. I just gave them a way to keep their identities secret, he countered. Izuku would especially need it, Xena had to concede he had a good point. I wanted to give Miles some web shooters, Zero huffed. You can't, Xena said firmly. Not yet you mean, he countered. Only if he agrees, she replied with ease. Zero stuck his tongue out at the woman in a childish display of defiance before sighing. I wish we didn't have to do it like this, Zero mumbled. I know but these were the restrictions placed on you, Xena stated. I know, Zero groaned. Stupid old coots, he mumbled. Xena didn't bother admonishing him since she understood his frustration and couldn't blame him. Are you sure about them? Xena said looking at Zero in concern. You understand what's at stake don't you? I do, Zero admitted, then he gave a broad grin. And I have no doubt I chose the right ones for this. Xena didn't say anything to his proclamation. She simply chose to smile at the boy and give him her support just like she had been all this time. Never. Back in the MHA world on a roof, a hole leading to absolutely nowhere opened once again. Only this time, instead of taking something in, it was spitting something out. 3 somethings to be precise. Miles grunted as he hit the ground. Ooh, Izuku groaned as he landed on top of Miles. Miles cried at the sudden weight. Beep, RWBY squeaked as she landed on top of Izuku. Izuku grunted at the sudden passenger. Well, Miles wheezed out as yet another body landed on top of him. RWBY and Izuku were thankfully quick to get off and help the teen up. That happened, Miles winced, having finally stood up before looking around. So, any idea where we're supposed to go? That would be a question for him, RWBY responded, pointing a finger at Izuku. Izuku jumped at the sudden attention from 2 teens that were still virtually strangers. He was still jittery around people. His eyes wandered over to RWBY. Especially cute girls. Izuku shook his head before taking a deep breath. He needed to focus, there was a child hanging in the balance, hormones could wait, damn it. Why did they drop us off on a roof? RWBY questioned, taking note of their surroundings. Indeed, they were on a roof in a small neighborhood. Thankfully it had been a commercial building and not a house they had landed on. Izuku looked around the area before his eyes caught something in his peripheral. He turned to see the girl and the 2 men walking towards the mansion. His eyes stayed on the girl as she and her escorts entered through the gates of a large estate. He watched them walk her towards the front doors, or more accurately push her towards the doors. Nod to gently mighty head. It was clear she didn't want to be there. Assholes, Miles scowled. Clearly he had seen the same thing Izuku had, and the Greenite had to agree. RWBY hadn't said anything, but he was sure her thoughts aligned with theirs. And as Izuku took in the details of the place, he was coming to a conclusion he didn't like. Guards on every corner. Most of them wearing some form of mask. Weapons being carried by the ones in the courtyard. Yeah, Izuku had no doubt about it. It's Yakuza base, he said, causing the other 2 to look at him. You serious? Miles asked. Positive. What's a Yakuza? RWBY asked. You have gangs back on Remnant? Miles asked and RWBY nodded. Think of them like that. Gotcha, RWBY nodded. Before we continue, we should get a rundown on abilities, Miles suggested, causing the other 2 to nod in agreement. My powers make it to where I can do anything a spider can, Miles went first since it was his idea. Anything? Izuku asked with clear curiosity. Mostly, Miles corrected. Super strong and agile, stick to walls, sense danger. Spiders can sense danger? RWBY asked. You can do all that without needing an exoskeleton, Izuku questioned. Apparently, Miles shrugged, answering both questions at once. What about webs? Izuku asked as he wrote in the. Where did you get that notebook? RWBY asked, pointing at the notebook Izuku was writing in. No webs, Miles replied. I need to figure it out quick though, he admitted. Some time to figure out at a later date, Izuku nodded. So we're just ignoring my question about the notebook, RWBY muttered. What about you? Izuku asked, turning his attention over to RWBY. My aura augments my physical capabilities and also acts as a natural shield, RWBY answered with a pout at having been ignored. Natural shield, Izuku questioned as he wrote. So, like it protects you from damage? More or less, though it's not unlimited, RWBY answered. It'll eventually run out and it takes time to replenish. What about that semblance thing you mentioned? Miles questioned. My semblance, RWBY explained. It allows me to run at high speeds. And the roses you leave behind? Miles asked with a questioning look. He only received a shrug as an answer. No idea, she said honestly. Some kind of aesthetic. Izuku frowned at this, seemingly doubtful about that, but decided now was not the time to ask his questions or share any theories. What about your weapon? Oh, you mean my baby Crescent Rose, RWBY said, happily holding out her weapon. With a spin she activated Crescent Rose, allowing the boys witness it changing into its scythe form for the first time. It's a combat scythe with a high-impact sniper rifle feature, she answered simply. I want one, Miles whispered after picking his jaw off the floor. How high exactly? Izuku asked after recovering. Pretty sure I can blow those doors off the hinges from here, RWBY answered as Crescent Rose went back to its dormant state. If I fire from the gate I can leave a good-sized hole in the wall, Izuku and Miles looked at her warily at that statement as both their eyes trailed down to the compact weapon resting in her hands. What? She asked. Anyways, Miles said, deciding to change the subject by looking over at Izuku. What can you do? Izuku had been dreading this moment. A part of him had hoped he could keep it secret, but he knew that was impossible. Given what they were about to attempt, it was necessary that everyone was aware of what was in their shared arsenal. Hopefully they can put off their disgust until after this, he thought sadly before taking in a deep breath. I don't have any powers, he finally answered. And as he finished his sentence, he braced himself for the inevitable. Okay, so you're the strategist then, Miles nodded. Huh? Makes sense, RWBY agreed. You're the ones that's been able to piece details together. Plus this is your world, so we'll follow your lead on this. Wait, Izuku stopped. You don't care I'm quirkless? I mean, should we? RWBY asked skeptically, looking over at Miles, who simply shrugged. Yes, Izuku blurted out before he could stop himself. Why? The silver-eyed girl questioned. Because, Izuku began before stopping. Because that's what he'd been shown all his life. Because he was lesser. Because everyone made a point to let him know he was lesser. Because it was all he knew. Dude, I just got my powers a few days ago, Miles admitted. And before I got them, I had no interest in fighting crime, he added. So I was in the same boat as you not that long ago. I always wanted to be a huntress, RWBY admitted. And I admit it is a bit weird you don't have aura, she confessed. But that's more me getting used to different worlds with different rules. I know a ton of heroes back home that honestly don't have powers, Miles added. And they all started way later in life than we are now, the spider in training continued. So, trust me when I say you have nothing to worry about. Izuku looked between the two of them for any signs of deception, but saw that he couldn't find any. They really had no problem with him not having any powers. Izuku felt his eyes watering, but quickly shook it off. He could cry his heart out later. For now, he needed to help the girl. So to help him get away from those thoughts, Izuku did what he did best. He analyzed. Okay, RWBY is definitely our fastest, and Miles the strongest, he began. In terms of combat, RWBY has the most experience, but that's only as long as she has her weapon, and we have to assume the halls are going to be too narrow for her to use it. Miles' spider sense should allow us to detect any incoming danger, however it needs an instant reaction. Add into the fact of a possible timetable and mumble. So this is something he does often then, RWBY observed. Was definitely, Miles agreed. The two agreed to give him a couple minutes before pulling him back. Where'd he get the notebook? Oh, so new you notice, RWBY rolled her eyes. What? Miles questioned, however before they could start bickering Izuku came back to reality. I got it, Izuku suddenly yelled out, causing the other two teens to jump. He looked over at them with a confident grin and a gleam in his eyes. I got a plan that should let us get her out. Miles and RWBY looked at each other before giving their full attention to Izuku, indicating they were listening. He told them his plan. Little did they know that the matching insane grins the three of them had would become a common sight. I need a nap, a man with a face mask on muttered as he continued his patrol around the base. Thankfully his shift was almost over. Maybe he could get to his room before Overhaul and his cronies got back. The less time he spent in that guy's presence the better. Hey, he was brought from his internal musings as someone called his name. The grunt looked up to see a kid with a green hoodie with a pipe in his hand running towards him. He couldn't quite make out his face because the hood was up, but he could tell it was a boy. You gotta call the cops. Beat a kid, he scowled. The kid was clearly not from around here, since he couldn't recognize this was a Yakuza home. Everyone in the neighborhood knew. What? But there's a villain trying to kill me, the kid shouted. He looked ready to ask what he was talking about until he heard a distinct crash. He looked up to see a car clearly upside down lying in the middle of the street. At back here someone roared, and from around the corner a man wearing a clearly homemade costume was looking at him and the kid. He was wearing a mask so his face couldn't be seen, but he was pretty sure the guy was glaring. You gotta hide me please, the green kid begged. Screw that, he wasn't about to get involved. Getting involved would bring attention, and Overhaul didn't like attention. Before he could tell the kid to buzz off and leave him to fend for himself, his pursuer began running towards them. Screw this, the kid shouted and pushed past him and ran through the still open gates. Get out of there, the grunt shouted, but the kid ignored him and continued running deeper into the home. So, you're hiding him, the other guy roared. I ain't doing nothing, he just ran, and the Yakuza member countered. Then stay out of my way, the would-be villain roared as he pushed past him and also ran into the courtyard. Great, the grunt growled before running after the two. It was clear he wasn't the only one as he saw other people who were on patrol with him running towards all the noise. He looked up to see the villain had made it to the kid and began swinging him around while the kid screamed in fear. Before any of them could reach the two, the villain roared as he threw the teen in his hands. Crash, the kid in green went flying through the front doors of the house. Shit, the grunt shouted. We gotta stop him and get the kid out of the house. Worry about the kid later, another Yakuza member exclaimed. Take this guy out first. With it, everyone in the vicinity charged at the villain, while some more people piled out of the house as well. The grunt almost wanted to call it excessive had he not seen the villain throw a car a few seconds ago. So busy with trying to stop the raging villain, no one saw the red blur that ran into the house, leaving behind a trail of roses that would soon dissipate. Who the hell is this? A guy inside the house shouted, looking down at the unconscious kid in front of him. Don't worry about him right now, we need to get rid of the guy outside, another yelled, grabbing his ally by the shirt and pulled him towards the door. The others seemed to agree as they all ran outside to subdue the villain, causing a scene in their courtyard. Soon enough Izuku's unconscious body was alone. "Oh my god, I can't believe that worked," Izuku huffed as he slowly got up. He took in a couple breaths to calm his beating heart before standing up. His eyes moved across the area looking for where they might have taken her. He had to be quick about this. Miles couldn't hold them off forever. Crazy plan. Thankfully he wasn't alone in the search. "Good job getting in," Izuku nodded looking over at RWBY. Her hood was pulled up like his, and a mask covered her face to help hide her identity. In truth she and Miles didn't really need it since they were from different worlds, but the camaraderie was appreciated. "Speed's my thing," she smiled before shuddering. "Though I feel naked without Crescent Rose." Izuku made a point to look forward and fight the blush trying to make its way onto his face. Instead he picked up the pipe he had found right before he and Miles had gotten in position. "Let's go," he said hoping she didn't hear the squeak in his voice. With that the two ran into the halls of the mansion. They were as quiet as they could be as they peeked through multiple rooms to find the girl. "Wait." Izuku paused as he went back to the first time he had met the girl. He hadn't been looking for her at all. He just knew where to go. Now there was a chance Zero or Xena had influenced him to find her, but it was worth a shot. He knew the girl that had felt a connection to him like he had her. It was a long shot, but maybe he could use that connection. With a deep breath Izuku closed his eyes and allowed himself to clear his mind. At first nothing happened, it was simply silent. Left. Izuku opened his eyes and looked to his left. Without hesitation he began running. His body moving on instinct. He didn't pause, he wasn't careful of any potential Yakuza in the hall, he didn't even alert RWBY of where he was going. He just kept running through the halls. He made one more turn and for the first time he wasn't alone in the halls. His eyes laid on her instantly. She was fighting to get out of the hold of one of the two men pulling her along. He felt a slight breeze behind him indicating RWBY had arrived. How she had found him so quickly he didn't know. He didn't have time to think about it. His focus was on the other girl in the hall. Her eyes looked up and saw him. For the second time their eyes met. She was right there. Izuku moved before he was thinking. "Speed Blitz," one of them Izuku shouted. RWBY looked at him but seemed to understand what he meant because she activated her semblance and ran at her chosen target, impacting with him at full speed. So distracted at RWBY's sudden attack the other guy didn't even see Izuku as he hit him over the head with the pipe. Thankfully for Izuku it seemed to be enough as the guy crumpled instantly. However, the brutal act of violence caused the little girl to squeak in fear and back away from Izuku. "Hey, it's okay," Izuku said holding his hand out to her. "We've come to save you," he smiled pulling up his mask so the girl could see his face. "Save me?" the little girl asked as her eyes met Izuku's once again. This caused her to stop moving back as she continued looking at him. Izuku approached her slowly and once she was in reach pulled her into his embrace and lifted her up. "What's your name?" Izuku asked. "Eri," she whispered. "Well Eri," Izuku began. "We're gonna get you out of here." "Don't," Eri whispered grasping his shirt with her tiny hands. Izuku risked looking down at her as their eyes met once again. In that moment a lot of feelings were conveyed between the two of them. Above all was the rest of her sentence. "Don't let me hope." It was a familiar thought process Izuku was familiar with. One he had adopted for his entire life. All except for one moment when he let his guard down. When he had let himself hope again. Without a quirk you cannot become a hero. Izuku wouldn't let her down like he had been. To make sure she understood that he did the one thing he felt was the right thing to do in this situation. Izuku smiled. "It's okay now," Izuku said gently. Eri looked up at him with wide eyes as Izuku continued to give her a warm smile. "You're gonna be okay," something she hadn't received in a long time. "They won't ever hurt you again," she felt something in her eyes gather, "because I am here." Eri couldn't hold back the tears as those words hit her hard. She tucked her head into his shoulder as she felt her tears wet his shirt. Without another word Izuku began running back towards the exit. As he ran down the halls he heard a whoosh and heard a second pair of footsteps joining him. Thankfully he knew who it was. "You good?" Izuku asked looking at his ally. He hadn't seen her fight, but from the way her hair was messed up she seemed to have been struggling. "Just wishing I knew how to punch better," RWBY answered sheepishly ignoring the pain from her bruises. In truth she couldn't fight well without Crescent Rose. It had taken her way longer to take her guy out than she would have liked. "Remember go through the side with her," Izuku reminded his ally before looking back down at Eri. "Okay Eri, this is my friend and she's going to take you away from here." "But what about you?" Eri asked. "Don't worry I'll be right behind you," Izuku assured her. "We're almost there," RWBY exclaimed. "Good." Now all RWBY had to do was escape. Then Izuku would run back out the front and Miles would give chase to him. Seeing as it wasn't their problem the Yakuza members wouldn't bother chasing after them. And considering all of the illegal activity they were definitely getting into they hadn't called the cops or heroes. As long as Miles wasn't too loud, then one wouldn't show up at random. They could do this, they were going to win. Crash. The three looked to see Miles having been thrown through a window. Or maybe he just jinxed them all because he was such a dumb Deku. One of them is really strong, Miles groaned as he got up. However, that gave his opponents time to re-enter the house, and once there they took note of the scene in front of them. Namely Eri in the arms of Izuku. "They're trying to take Eri," one of them shouted. This was all a setup. "Guys, I think they're onto us," Miles muttered. "Scarlet, get her out of here," Izuku ordered, handing Eri over to RWBY. RWBY nodded and turned to run. "Wait," Eri called, but RWBY had already taken off before she could protest. She managed to slide through a small gap between the Yakuza members before they could close ranks. "Damn, did someone go after them?" someone shouted. "Overhaul's due back any minute." "It's only a few, we can take him," Miles nodded, looking at the crooks in front of him. His thoughts quickly changed as one of them knocked on the wall behind them and doors from all sides began opening and more people in masks began to pour out. Soon the two teens found themselves surrounded by them with no clear escape. Izuku gulped while Miles let out a low chuckle. "Did I say take him?" Miles began. "I clearly meant join him. I've always wanted to know what it was like being a Yakuza, you know." "Sure thing, kid," one of them chuckled in a clearly non-friendly way. "We initiate all new members with a beating." "You don't say," Izuku gulped. "Yep," the leader nodded. "You live and you're in." Good to know," Green Miles hissed, grabbing his fellow teen by the shirt. "Why didn't you tell me these people rolled like this?" Miles accused, shaking his ally. Izuku felt his eyes widen under his mask. "I told you," he argued. "No, you didn't," Miles denied. "I did," Izuku retorted. "What you say?" Miles snapped. "I did this," Izuku replied, shaking his head. "What do this mean, man?" Miles argued, mimicking Izuku's movements. "I don't understand your signals." "That means I go this way and you go this way." "I go that way, you go this way," Miles asked with confusion, but Izuku could see the clear understanding in his eyes. "Pretty much." "Okay," Miles nodded before slugging the Yakuza closest to him, while Izuku went in the opposite direction, swinging his pipe. Outside, RWBY had taken Eri across the street and placed her by a dumpster. Not the most ideal place, but she needed to get the boys out quickly. "Are you okay?" she asked the little girl. "You gotta take me back," Eri cried. "I can't do that," RWBY said, shaking her head. "We're here to save you." "But I'm cursed," she said with tears in her eyes. In that moment RWBY felt an emotion she tried to avoid as best she could. Anger. Anger at whoever looked at a child and called them a curse. She was thankful Grim didn't exist here because she was positive with all the anger she was feeling she would have called a stampede. She would deal with it later at a shooting range or taking out some Grim when she got home. For now she had a girl to save. "I'll be back," RWBY reassured with a smile. "But I need you to stay here, can you do that for me?" "But he'll hurt you," Eri cried, and something in RWBY's heart broke at the child's voice. "He'll have to catch me first," RWBY winked. Then in a blur she was gone, leaving behind rose petals. Back inside, Izuku and Miles were fighting off the thugs surrounding them. More accurately, Miles was fighting them off while Izuku was doing his best to stay alive. The pipe was helping, but it was clear he didn't have the muscle strength to do any real damage. "I really need to learn to fight," Izuku thought as he managed to trip a thug, causing him to crash into one of his allies. Miles in the meantime was punching and kicking anyone that got near him. His form was definitely sloppy, but his spider senses allowed him to stay just ahead of his opponents. Add in his enhanced physique and he was basically punching them all through the walls. Literally. So lost in the fight he didn't even notice the yellow tendrils of electricity crawling up his arms. One of the Yakuza tried to grab him from behind, but Miles' danger sense went off. "Back off," Miles shouted as he backhanded the man with more strength than he meant to. Doing so, the man made contact with the electricity which sent him flying through one of the outer walls. There was a pause in the fight as everyone witnessed the sudden and powerful blow. And then. "You have electric powers?" Izuku shouted. "I have electric powers?" Miles echoed, looking down at his arms. "You didn't know?" Izuku asked. 3 days, Miles retorted. Before the argument could continue, RWBY appeared between them, indicating it was time to go. "Green first," Miles called. He was sure he could hold them off a bit longer. RWBY nodded and grabbed Izuku. Izuku seemed reluctant to leave Miles behind, but understood this was a part of the plan he had made. So he took RWBY's hand and allowed his body to be dragged away at speeds it was most definitely not used to. "Oh, that's weird," Izuku admitted. "You'll get used to it," RWBY chuckled. "You're back." He turned to see Eri looking up at him with worry and the small shard of hope she had left. "Told you I would see you again," Izuku smiled, scooping her back into his arms. He turned his eyes over to RWBY, who nodded before vanishing again to get Miles. "Where's she going?" Eri asked in worry. "She has one more person to get and then we'll be leaving this place forever." "Really?" Eri asked. "Really?" Izuku nodded. "What the hell is going on?" a voice to Izuku's left spoke. In his arms Eri went stiff as a board. Izuku felt his breath hitch at the voice. Slowly his eyes looked over to see who was talking. As soon as his eyes landed on him, Izuku knew who it was despite having never met the man before then. He knew this was the person that Eri was terrified of. The one Xena had told them to avoid at all cost. Overhaul. The man was looking across the street at the mansion where the pandemonium was happening. Around him were a group of 8 men by Izuku's count. More than likely the executives he had hears about. More people he and the others weren't ready to fight. He felt his heart jump into his throat when Overhaul's eyes landed on him. But the hell Overhaul cut himself off as he took notice of what exactly Izuku was carrying. More accurately who. Eri squeaked as she hid too late. Overhaul had seen all he needed to know what was going on. It all happened in an instant. Overhaul slammed his hand to the ground and Izuku watched as a plethora of spikes were coming at him. He moved as fast as he could, holding on to Eri and running through the street. Green Izuku turned to see Miles and RWBY across the street in front of the mansion gates, looking over at him with alarm and worry. They looked like they were going to come and help them, but Izuku put a stop to that. Though Izuku called, running with Eri in his hands. RWBY and Miles hesitated before Miles made the call and opened the gate and pulled RWBY through with him. With them gone, Izuku didn't have to worry about anyone else but himself and Eri. "Give her back." Eri let out a squeak of pure fear at hearing the anger in Overhaul's voice, but Izuku held firm. With a shout, Izuku jumped forward while pressing the button on the watch, and the door that led to absolutely nowhere opened in front of him and Eri. The two went flying through the door and Izuku looked back to make sure there was enough distance. His eyes met Overhaul's. Much like with Eri, time seemed to move in slow motion as the two stared at each other. However, instead of a look of a plea meeting a look of understanding, one held a look of hatred while the other held determination. It was with that determination that Izuku mustered up a response to the Yakuza boss's demand. "Never." The door closed just before the spike reached them. Overhaul glared before letting out a primal roar of hatred and rage. "When do we start?" Izuku felt himself land hard against the floor as he cradled Eri in his arms protectively. He was getting really tired of falling. He let out a small groan as he shook off the pain from his landing. "You made it." Izuku blinked a few times to see Miles and RWBY looking down at him with looks of relief and joy. The two helped him up as he continued to hold Eri in his arms. From the way she was gripping his shirt, it was clear she was reluctant to let go of him. "You're safe now," Izuku reassured, looking down at the girl in his arms. She looked back up at him with wide red eyes. "Really?" Eri asked with trepidation, almost afraid of his words being true. "Really?" Izuku smiled. She seemed to take his words to heart as her grip lessened. "We did it," RWBY cheered, grabbing the two boys and Eri into a hug. "We actually did it." Was there ever any doubt? Miles tried to play it cool, but from the way his body was vibrating he was just as happy. "Didn't you get mad at me when we were surrounded?" Izuku asked. "I have no idea what you're talking about," Miles denied. "Awesome," someone shouted. The group turned to see Zero walking over to them, just as excited as RWBY, with a large smile plastered on his face. Xena was not that far behind him with a calm smile on her face. "I knew you could do it," Zero cheered. Eri looked at the newcomers with fear as she hid her face in Izuku's shirt once again, but kept peeking at the strangers. "Hello there," Xena said, approaching the shy girl in Izuku's arms. "It's nice to meet you," she said, giving the frightened girl a warm smile. Eri peeked her head at the woman but didn't say anything back. Something that was expected given everything the poor girl had been through. Xena waved her hand over Eri's face and her eyes began to feel heavy. Seconds later the little girl was asleep in Izuku's arms. "It's best she gets some rest for now," Xena explained. "We have some important things to talk about after all." The three looked at each other and agreed with that statement. After all, they had all been taken from their own worlds to be told that the multiverse was real, along with being tasked with rescuing a little girl. The time for answers was now. "Where would you like to begin?" Xena asked. "Who exactly are you two?" Izuku asked, looking between the two people that had brought them all here. "And where are we exactly?" "Are you gods?" Miles added, coming to his own conclusions. "With the abilities you've used so far it would make sense." Zero and Xena looked at each other, holding a quick conversation with their eyes before addressing the three. "Technically we're not gods," Zero admitted, being to the one to speak up first. "We are a similar existence though." "Similar how?" RWBY added with a raised eyebrow. "You can call us eons." Zero grinned while Xena looked over at him. "You've been hanging around in Honkai again, haven't you?" Xena deadpanned. "I will neither confirm nor deny," Zero responded. It wasn't his fault that Star Train was a riot to be on. "Eons?" Izuku asked, he had never heard the term before. Then again, going by the look on Xena's face, it wasn't a term she was pleased with. "What is that exactly? And how is it similar to gods?" Miles added, thinking back to all of the gods he had seen in his world. Ah well, I can explain the difference, Zero smiled, looking over Xena, who sighed but nodded, motioning him to continue. You see, gods and deities have abilities that focus on the balance of what makes up everything in their respective planes of existence. What do you mean? Well, say God has certain abilities or control over a domain, so to speak. Like water and storms, the three nodded in understanding. Well, it would be his job to make sure there is plenty of water. Like Poseidon from Greek mythology, Izuku said, and noted the way Xena's face soured when he mentioned his chosen example. Each god has control over a specific set of domains, like how Poseidon had the sea. He was also known to create earthquakes with his trident, Izuku continued writing. So does that mean earthquakes are under his domain and he is required to create them occasionally? Added in one, Zero gave the greenette a thumbs up. They use the abilities within their domains to keep the world going, as they are considered natural phenomena. If you don't count the stories when they use their abilities to purposely harm people, Miles muttered. Sadly, abuse of power comes with the territory, Xena sighed. They're especially bad about it though, she added with a mutter under her breath. But how does that relate to you? RWBY asked. To put it simply, we could have those exact same abilities and never do anything with them, Zero answered simply. Wait, what? Izuku asked as he stopped scribbling in the notebook he had pulled from somewhere. Yeah, I could have a bunch of abilities, but I don't have a responsibility to use them constantly like they do, Zero shrugged. So, wait, Miles held his hand up as the implication of the words hit him. You could have the abilities of all the Olympians and go your entire life without ever using them. Yoop, Zero answered, popping the P. And considering I'm immortal, well, my whole life is a long time, he added. So, what is it you do exactly then? RWBY asked. To her it sounded like they were just being lazy. Our role is eons. Please stop calling us that, Xena shook her head at the name. As to guard, Zero finished. Guard what? Izuku asked. The multiverse, Zero answered with a wide grin. He paused for a moment to let the word sink into the three. Guard? Izuku questioned. From what exactly? From itself mostly, Zero answered. Huh? Miles asked. Being the geeks I know you all are, I'm sure you're aware of how multiverse theory works. The three nodded at his words, none of them denying being geeks. Worlds created when certain moments have more than one possible outcome. Every decision made created an alternate world where a decision was made differently and so on. Well, sometimes the decisions made cause damage from within, Zero continued. What kind of decisions could cause such damages? RWBY asked, somewhat fearing the answer. Say the Four Kingdoms were never established, Xena offered, causing RWBY to go pale. She had read what it had been like before the kingdoms. Her world would have been overrun by Grimm. The thought made her shudder. Or if the hero system was never established, Zero added, looking over at Izuku, who shuddered at the thought. The hero had been established because people had been running wild with their quirks. Society had been on the edge of collapsing. His personal issues with the system aside, Izuku couldn't deny they had been a necessary deterrent in a rather dark time in history. Or in your case, the Cold War had heated up, Xena finished, looking at Miles, who gulped. Or the Nazis won WW2. Nope, Miles crossed his arms in an X to deny the thought. And why did I get two examples? These are the kind of decisions that can have a profound effect on whole worlds and their future, Xena nodded. Should said damages accumulate too much, they can possibly lead to a multiverse destabilizing and destroying itself because of some bad decisions in life. So, we maintain it, Zero finished, pointing between himself and Xena. Okay, but where do we come into all of this? Miles asked, pointing towards himself, Izuku and RWBY. Well, the problem is that we can't directly stop the damages. Wait, directly? Izuku asked, although he has a hunch he knew where she was going with this. As dictated by the big man, we can't do much interfering with what you guys do, Zero answered. We simply maintain it and can only interfere under very specific situations. So if a multiverse dies, and boy was the revelation that they could even die a crazy thing to learn. Then all you can do is let it happen. Sadly yes, Zero answered, obviously not liking the fact. However, from the mischievous grin on his face, he was leading up to something. Unless we had help. Help? RWBY spoke. Yep, Zero confirmed. We can call on people to help fix the problems that may potentially destroy the multiverse. People? Miles said, slowly looking at the two other teens. Like us. Indeed, Xena answered. So, we're kind of like your avatars or champions or something, RWBY asked with sparkles in her eyes. In a sense, Xena answered, smiling at the girl's excitement. What kind of special circumstances would allow you to interfere directly? A few, Xena answered. Mostly they revolve around divine beings like ourselves directly interfering or causing problems. So like if the Olympians were causing issues, then you can, Izuku began. And kick their asses, Zero finished with a grin that held way too many teeth. Although with them it's never a matter of if but when, Xena huffed in annoyance. You sound like you know them, RWBY noted. "The version of them was causing trouble in my territory not that long ago," she answered. "I was unfortunately called away at the time, or else I would have nipped it in the bud," she huffed. Why Zeus thought Zalga and his host wanted his throne I'll never know. "Zalga?" Izuku asked and Xena eyed him. Why was she staring at him? "The friend," she answered but gave nothing away. "The pervert," Zero snickered, then his eyes traveled to Izuku and began laughing even harder. Izuku tilted his head in confusion at the reaction. Was he missing something? "What other kind of circumstances?" RWBY asked, getting the conversation back on track. "Outside interference," Zero responded. "From powerful beings that can travel the multiverse and decide to cause problems." "More than just gods can travel the multiverse?" Miles asked. He was aware that Dr. Doom had been trying to do something similar once, but the Fantastic Four had put a stop to it. He really shouldn't have been surprised that others succeeded in similar endeavors. "Yeah," Zero answered honestly. Izuku stopped writing for a moment and looked up at Xena and Zero with slight hesitation. He had a thought, a feeling honestly, and was afraid to share. But if he was going to do this, he needed all the information he could get. "Like other eons?" he asked slowly. Zero and Xena looked at him, but their expressions revealed they were not offended nor surprised at his question. "Indeed," Xena nodded. There was a tense silence. She seemed hesitante to go into detail about the topic at the moment, so Izuku decided not to ask the questions he desperately wanted to ask. They could wait for now. "But that's nothing you have to worry about unless one decides to pick a host," Zero said, picking up where Xena left off. "Host? The Eons can choose to reside within someone," Xena explained. "In doing so the host will receive power from the Eon, although it depends on how high the compatibility." "Compatibility," Izuku repeated as he continued writing. "So you guys can't just go into anybody. You have to be compatible with them, and even then it might not necessarily be a 100% compatibility. I'm guessing that means depending on how high the compatibility is, then that's how much power can be given to the host. But does that mean if the host goes past their maximum level of power then they could die, or maybe it's strategic and mutter. And he's off to the races," RWBY sighed. "His lung capacity must be crazy cause I have yet to see him inhale," Miles pointed out. Zero chuckled at the greenet's antics, while Xena let out a sigh. Alpha, that was one of fondness. She walked over to the boy and placed a hand on his shoulder, breaking him from his mutter storm. In doing so he took notice of the little divine woman inches away from him smiling at him. His face turned red as he took a few steps back and bowed. "Sorry," he apologized. "It's fine," Xena laughed lightly. "We can go into the details of hosts at a later time, for now let us move on as we are almost finished." Izuku nodded rapidly. "Anyways, bottom line, we have a bunch of rules that we have to follow," Zero began. "A lot of them are stupid, but I get why they are there," he admitted. "You, following?" The team nodded, showing they understood what was being said to them. "Good, so I think you can guess why you're here." "Yeah," Izuku nodded, speaking for the other two. "We're here to be your champions." "That's one word for it," Zero nodded. "Although I don't think that fits you all, from the way the three of them looked they agreed the word didn't really fit. But yeah, I summoned you guys to be the ones I send when I see a decision that could potentially destroy a universe which will affect the multiverse." The three took a moment to let those words sink in. They were being chosen by a divine being to save more than just their worlds but multiple. It was an extremely high honor, albeit a bit overwhelming. However, there was one question that needed to be asked. One that was lingering on all of their minds. One that needed an answer. "Why us?" RWBY was the one to ask. "From what you're saying then it would be better to call on people with much more experience than us," Izuku added. "So why three teenagers with little experience?" Miles finished. Xena looked between the three of them, understanding where they were coming from. She could recognize the valid points they were bringing up. However, she wasn't the one that needed to answer them. Her eyes moved over to Zero, who kept his eyes trained on them. "Truth be told, I wasn't given a lot of options," Zero began. "What do you mean?" Izuku asked. Zero looked between them as if debating his answer before coming to an answer. "I'm not going to lie to you," he started, sounding the most serious he had so far. "I'm asking you all to risk your lives on a cosmic scale, and the least I can do is be honest with you at all times," he added. "Do you understand?" Once again the three teens looked around at each other, having a silent conversation. Miles and RWBY nodded to Izuku, who looked back and nodded. "Okay," Zero said before answering the original question. "In your respective universes none of you make a significant impact," Zero answered honestly. "I won't go into exact details, so I'll show you instead." Without warning, Zero snapped his fingers. The devastation was quick to hit. Zero watched as all three flinched at their minds, bombarded with the information of what their lives were to be. All of their reactions different. "Damn it," Miles growled as he allowed the information to wash over him. Anger clear across his face. "No," RWBY whispered as she did her best to stop the tears from spilling. The despair she felt could have drowned them all. I see, Izuku sighed. His reaction was the calmest of all. It seems whatever he saw was one he accepted. Or rather expected. None of them looked at each other and they all had the decency not to ask what the others saw. Then again, considering their similar reactions they could all guess it wasn't anything good. I'm sorry, Zero apologized. But like I said I will only ever be honest with you. He waited a bit longer to allow them to collect themselves before continuing. If what we saw is true, Miles began. Then surely you could have had better options than us. I don't, Zero denied. Honestly the deck is being stacked against me. Against you? Izuku questioned. It's not important right now, Xena answered. Zero looked like he wanted to argue, but the firm look on Xena's face told him he wasn't going to win this one. However he wasn't prepared to back down either. I'll do it. The two Eons stopped their glaring before looking at Izuku who was looking at them with determination. I'll be one of your avatars, Izuku confirmed with a nod. I can't be a hero on my world. Hell I'm not even allowed to try, he said sadly. And from what I saw my life isn't going to go in a direction I like. He looked back up at them and that spark was back, but this opportunity allows me to help people and make sure they don't suffer. So, I'm in. There was a pause as his words sank into all those around him. With great power comes great responsibility, Miles began moving to stand next to Izuku. I can't think of a greater responsibility than keeping the multiverse safe. All my life while I was ridiculed because I wanted to make the fairy tale happy endings I read as a child come true, RWBY whispered. But isn't that what it means to want to help someone? To make sure everyone gets a happy ending, she stepped up to the other side of Izuku. Let's do this. There was a stillness in the air as their words were taken in by the two divine beings in the room. Then a small chuckle flowed through the air. Soon the chuckle got louder and turned into full-blown laughter. All attention was back on Zero as his laughter filled the air. Ahahaha I knew it, Zero laughed. I really did choose the best ones. His grin was broad as he looked at the trio in front of him who seemed surprised at his reaction. Thank you for proving me right, he smiles. The three seemed taken aback by his words, but soon they had smiles of their own on their faces. However, there was one last thing that needed to be addressed. There is one last thing I'm wondering, Izuku began, and Zero perked up letting them know he was listening. You keep saying you're the guardian of Out Multiverse, Zero nodded on confirmation. Then Izuku turned his attention to Xena. Then what's your role in all this, are you going to help him? More like offer guidance where I can since this is his first multiverse. Yeah, Zero nodded. She has bigger responsibilities than this, he explained. She'll be around until she thinks I can handle this, which I can, he scoffed looking at her good-naturedly. However there was one term used that left the three confused. Bigger responsibilities, RWBY asked. What could be bigger than guarding the multiverse or a multiverse? Miles added. Zero and Xena blinked at the question before Zero laughed again. Oh well I can answer that, Zero grinned and there was a gleam in his eyes. A gleam that told the three teens that whatever he was about to say was actually going to blow their minds more than they've already been. You see Xena doesn't just guard a multiverse. She doesn't. No, she's a guard something much bigger. Bigger? RWBY exclaimed. What could be bigger than the multiverse? Her shock was shared with Miles and Izuku. Zero grinned and the light seemed to shine off his goggles as he leaned in. Then he answered. The Omniverse. The Omniverse? Izuku asked, completely unfamiliar with the term. He looked at Miles and RWBY who looked equally confused at the statement. What is that exactly? He asked for the three of them. Zero looked over at Xena with a somewhat pleading look. She looked at him bemused before nodding her head, giving her approval. The Omniverse is everything, Zero said. He clapped his hands and picture appeared. Every multiverse, Zero began as the trio looked on in awe. Then the image changed. Every megaverse and so on is encompassed within it. With each word the kid's eyes got wider and wider. Seriously? RWBY asked. Yep, Zero grinned. Then he created another image and everyone was in awe at what they saw. No matter how many new universes are born, the Omniverse will simply expand to contain it within itself as well. Ever expanding, all-encompassing. It is everything and nothing. There were no words to describe what the trio was seeing. They couldn't even begin to fathom what they were looking at. And you guard it? Miles asked looking over at Xena. Part of it, Xena answered humbly. No one can truly watch over the entire Omniverse by themselves. No one but the big man, Zero muttered. So by being a guardian of the Omniverse, Izuku began. That means you watch over multiple multiverses. Indeed, Xena answered. Along with several other types of verses. That's RWBY started. Insane, Miles finished. Well, it's nothing you all have to worry about, Zero reassured. All you have to do is focus on your multiverse. The three teens let out a collective sigh of relief at that. One multiverse was enough. So, Zero grinned looking at the teens who looked back at him. Are you ready? There was a brief moment as the three looked at each other. By all accounts they didn't really know each other. Hell, they weren't even from the same worlds. However, they all had a desire. A desire to save, to protect, to do good. Maybe that was enough for them to start. The three turned back to look at Zero and Xena. RWBY gave a bright smile as her eyes shined. Miles smirked, placing his mask back on his head, but not pulling it all the way down. Miles gave a confident grin, swinging the pipe over his shoulder. He would need to get a better weapon soon, but for now it served to send the message he was trying to portray. When do we start? Trailer begins. Zero. So, off the bat we got a couple problems popping up. Thankfully we can take them one at a time. It goes through a few scenes such as a bridge collapsing, people running away in panic, and finally the sky turning red. Xena. Remember, the goal is to get in and get out. The trio land on the ground in the middle of the night as they begin moving through the area stealthily. Xena. It's imperative you are not seen by people on other worlds. Who the hell are you guys? The trio look up at the group of people staring at them. RWBY puts her hands up and waves them around as she and the boys try to walk out of the room. RWBY. You didn't see anything. Xena sighs and rubs her head. Zero. Take these, they should be of help. Miles pressed a button on the sphere Zero had given them. Then it began blinking rapidly, catching them all off. Izuku. He gave us bombs. The three quickly run out of a room just in time as an explosion goes off. Music stops. Xena glares at Zero, who cackles before falling on the floor. Zero. Awesome, right? Music starts back up. Xena. Are you sure about this? Zero. Oh yeah, they're the most elite force out there. It shows the trio together with another group of kids. RWBY cooed as she sank into the white fur of a giant animal. RWBY. He's so fluffy. Miles smirked as he looked at the girl in the group. Miles. Hey. Izuku was writing rapidly in a notebook. Izuku. Mutter. Xena looked at Zero, who kept grinning at her before walking away. Behind him the trio were covered in dirt and grime, looking worse for wear. Miles. I don't think she bought it. Xena. Someone's going around assassinating people across the multiverse. Blitz. Here at IMP. The hole appears in someone's head, revealing Moxie being the one to have taken the shot. Blitz. We take care of all your assassinating needs. Blood splatters onto Millie as she swings the axe and sword she has in her hands. Blitz. Satisfaction guaranteed. Luna glares before pouncing on her victim. Blitz spins a sword in his hand as he grins and stares down Izuku, who holds his pipe out. Blitz. Kids die for free. Sword and pipe clash as Izuku and Blitz begin fighting. Zero. Certain parties are hoping I fail at this. A group of people with glowing eyes seem to be glaring down at Zero, who grins up at them defiantly. Zero. Hoping we fail. RWBY. What do you mean Erie's gone? Irie looks around in curiosity, not seeing the looming figure coming towards her. Zero. They don't think you can do this. You're naive if you think fairy tales can come true. RWBY blocks an attack from a woman wearing a white fang mask. You're not ready to be Spider-Man, kid. Miles looks from the ground as a group of people in similar costumes to his own look down at him. You really think you can beat us without a quirk? Izuku took a step back as a large shadow moved towards him. Zero. But I know you can prove them all wrong. Izuku throws the pipe in his hand. The pipe goes flying into a solid surface before bouncing around the area, hitting multiple things, creating pandemonium around them. A moment later the trio is standing as a group of villains are on the ground unconscious while the room is in shambles. Izuku slowly picks up the pipe, and while Miles and RWBY look at it in awe. Izuku. I love this pipe. The next scene is of him swinging it with all his might at someone. I pray for the wicked on the weekend. Miles uses his webs to catch a boulder mid-air and throws it down at his opponent. Mama, can I get another amen? RWBY fires off her gun repeatedly as she slides under a blast that was aimed at her. Oh, it's Saturday night, yeah. In one world something begins to come out of a hole in the sky. In another world someone falls from a ledge only for Izuku to catch them. Swear to God, I ain't ever gonna repent. Izuku gets into a slugfest with someone as they roll around on the ground before headbutting them. Mama, can I get another amen? Zero laughs as he releases a plethora of bombs. Oh, it's Saturday night, yeah. Irie screams as her quirk activates. Saturday. Miles. We aren't weak. Miles glares as his venom begins to surround him. Saturday. RWBY. We aren't hopeless. RWBY's eyes glow as she rushes forward, creating a powerful whirlwind behind her at how fast she's going. Saturday. Izuku. We aren't pathetic. Izuku looks determined as he punches with all his might. Oh, it's Saturday night, yeah. Zero. I chose you all for a reason. The dark figure with glowing blue eyes glares down as it emits a malicious aura. Swear to God. The three are together laughing about something as they sit together. Swear to God. The three jump out of a window seemingly to escape something behind them. Swear to good. The three of them stand with confidence as they stare down the dark figure while an explosion occurs behind them. Oh, 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 it's Saturday night, yeah. 0. Together you can become. The trio charges at the dark figure. It's time. RWBY let out a little hum as she tinkered away on crescent rows, making sure everything was in working order. It was one of the few pastimes she enjoyed when she wasn't in school or taking on a mission. Moments like these are bliss, she said happily. Beep. Bliss disturbed. RWBY looked down at the watch she had placed on the table before remembering what the beep meant. Her eyes widened as soon as she did before grinning wide. It's time, RWBY smiled. Without another word she put crescent rows back together and changed her clothes. Once done she headed to her room to open the portal but stopped and turned towards the stairs. I'll see you later, Dad, RWBY said cheerfully. However, the man didn't give her a real response, too busy recovering from a hangover. If he had been paying attention, he would have noticed RWBY went back upstairs instead of leaving through the front door. Miles let out a sigh as classes ended for the day. Today had been brutal if he was being honest. Nothing he couldn't handle, but the amount of work given was insane. Good thing most of it wasn't due for at least a week, so he had time. Or maybe he shouldn't. If I fail out I can go back to my old school, he muttered to himself. Then again, he had tried that already and one of his teachers had called him out on it. Probably best not to think about it too much. Besides, if he did flunk out he would still have to deal with his parents and he'd rather not face that hurdle if he didn't have to. Hey, it's the guy who ripped that girl's hair out, he heard another student whisper to his left. You think that girl is okay? Oh, right, people were still talking about that. Miles slumped his shoulders. It had been an accident. It wasn't his fault, his powers had decided to come in then. He didn't even know he was going to be getting them. Not that that mattered to the other teens. To them he was just another guy the rumor mill was focused on. Hopefully it would all die down soon. Now that he thought about it, he hadn't seen Gwanda since he had taken her to the infirmary. Maybe he should check on her, make sure she was okay. He got ready to go to the office to ask what dorm room she was staying in when he heard something beep. It's time, Miles whispered. He looked around for a spot he could activate the portal, but too many kids were around. He could use the ally by the school building. With that he began to walk towards the school entrance where more students were heading. Hopefully no one was around. So busy trying to get out he failed to notice the pair of eyes on his back the entire way. I've managed to make some friends, Izuku said happily. Well, I think they're friends, it might be too early to tell, he admitted sheepishly. He looked over at his sleeping mother and as usual there wasn't so much as a twitch. But as long as she was breathing he would take it as a win. Maybe one day you can meet them if they do turn out to be friends, he smiled. He looked over at the clock to see it was the middle of the day. A good time to look for other jobs he could try and get. I gotta go, Mom, love you, he said, walking over to her and making sure the cover was on her. He planted a kiss on her forehead and with one last goodbye, made his way out of the hospital. The day would be the day, he was sure of it, he was gonna get a job and everything would be great. He proceeded to slam right into someone. Never mind, I'll just let death take me, he thought as he fell onto the ground. Sorry, he grunted. Are you okay? Yeah, the girl he bumped into answered. Izuku blinked as he registered the tone the voice had. Slowly his eyes looked up and what he saw made his heart stop. Are you good? Girl, Izuku mentally screamed. Hello? Are you okay? The girl asked before panicking. Oh no, did I give you a concussion? Izuku shook his head. Now was not the time. I'm okay, Izuku reassured, getting up. He was quick to hold his hand out to her, which she took in haste. In doing so all 5 fingers made contact with him and suddenly Izuku found himself floating. He thought as he felt himself become extremely light. Oh, sorry for using my quirk on you, the girl panicked before pressing her hands together. Release. In doing this Izuku found himself back on the ground. Izuku said intelligently as his mind was still playing catch up. Oh no, I'm going to be late, the girl whined. I'm sorry but I really have to go, but it's nice meeting you, then the girl was gone before Izuku could tell her to stop. What just happened? Izuku asked out loud although he wasn't expecting an answer. Beep. Izuku jumped at the sound before realizing it was coming from the watch. He looked down at it understanding what was happening. Look like it's time, he said before looking around to a secluded place to open the portal. Instrumental. The ship flies through a colorful tunnel at high speeds. All around the ship and within the tunnel are portals that show different worlds as the occupants within said world go about their day. Izuku was rather glad he didn't slam into the ground this time as he walked through the portal and back into the room he had been taken to. I am so glad we didn't crash that time. Izuku looked up to see RWBY appearing from her own portal just as another one opened and Miles walked out of it. But going through that thing still feels weird. Miles shuddered looking back at the portal that had transported him here watching as it closed. Hey RWBY, Miles, Izuku greeted with a smile and a bow. Good to see you guys again, Miles lazily waved. Hey guys, RWBY said happily, although there was a bit of nervousness. So, I guess everything wasn't a dream. If it was, I'd have to find out what kind of drugs my roommate fed me, Miles joked. You came back. Izuku looked up in time to see Eri scramble over to him as fast as her legs would let her. The relief at his presence was clear as day in her eyes. I told you I would, Izuku smiled at her. I know, Eri said shyly looking down at her feet. I just thought he might find you. The fear in her voice made it clear to Izuku who she was talking about. That'll never happen, Miles added reassuringly bending down so Eri didn't have to look up as much. He never saw our faces, so he doesn't know who to look for, Miles reassured. Besides we can beat him if it comes to it, RWBY added cheerfully. And that's the kind of confidence I like to see in my team. Everyone looked to see Zero and Xena looking at them, one with a massive grin and the other a welcoming smile. Your team? Miles asked with a raised eyebrow. I mean technically you all work for me, Zero pointed out. I find world-shattering decisions and send you all out to make sure those decisions don't lead to the downfall of everything. No pressure, Miles muttered. I better be getting paid for this, he added jokingly. I could use some lean, RWBY added with a rueful smile. What's lean? Izuku asked. You know, colorful cards that pay for everything, RWBY explained looking at the boys. You mean like a credit card? Miles offered. Credit card? RWBY tilted her head. Perhaps we can move on to the reason you've been called here, Xena jumped in before the tangent could continue. Aw, can't we do it later, Zero groaned. It was just getting good. Zero, Xena scolded. Alright, the younger Eon waved his hands airily. No mission today, but I figured this would be a good time to go into more details about what I need you guys to do, Zero explained. And give you a tour of the ship. Ship? Izuku asked. It's how you'll travel to whatever universe I need you guys to go to. What about the portal? RWBY pointed out. Couldn't that just take us to wherever we need to go? The distance is limited, Zero explained. Distance? Miles wondered. See, with every decision made in a universe and every variation thereafter the further it departs from the initial decision, Zero explained. I get it, Izuku muttered writing in the notebook he had pulled from somewhere. It's like a neighboring system. A universe would be next to the one that's only slightly different from it, whereas two that are completely different would be much further away. Exactly, the more different a universe is the further it is away from another, Xena confirmed. Technically you three live nowhere near each other, Zero added. I scoured for you guys. Really? Izuku wondered looking at Miles and RWBY who also seemed shocked by that revelation. Yeah, but we can talk about that later, Zero nodded. Anyways, the portals can only go so far, so the ship will help you travel to the correct universe, and since the ship technically is in the space between universes like we are now, then the portal will connect to it no matter how far the universes are from each other, Miles finished catching on. Got it in one, Zero grinned. Now to show you what you'll be traveling in, with that Zero snapped his fingers and the group found themselves teleported. They looked around in surprise at the sudden change in scenery before something caught their eye. Is this a spaceship? Izuku asked excitedly. So cool, Miles exclaimed with stars in his eyes. Spaceship? RWBY questioned. It looks like it's been out of commission for a while, Izuku muttered having taken in the thing's appearance. A while? Miles said. It looks like you bought it out of a junkyard. I know it's not much to look at, but that's just for now, Zero assured. At that moment a piece of the shielding chose to fall off. Red flag, Miles muttered. It does seem strange that your ship doesn't seem to be in top shape, Izuku admitted. I'm working on upgrading it, but the stupid council is restricting me, Zero grunted. Council, Izuku repeated. Oh, right, I didn't really talk about that, Zero rubbed his chin in realization. Well, long story short, there's this group of senile eons who are older than old itself and… Zero, Xena chided. Hey, if they want to restrict me on my own ship, then I can at least speak my mind about them, the younger Eon challenged before turning his attention back to the teens. Anyways, think of them like a group of military generals assigning other Eons to their locations and giving out assignments, he finished. Why are they restricting you so much? Miles frowned, to him it seemed excessive. Zero looked over at Xena who gave him a look causing him to grunt. I'm not allowed to go into details, but let's just say they don't like me very much, Zero finished. But don't worry, I'll tell you details someday, he promised looking over at Xena, as if daring her to tell him no. She looked at him but nodded in understanding. In truth, Xena didn't have a problem with Zero telling the trio everything, but she knew that if the council got wind of it, they would try to restrict him more. She didn't want them interfering more than they already had. No rush, RWBY smiled. She understood that were some things that couldn't be shared so easily. Just tell us whenever you're ready. Guaranteed, now let's check out the inside, Zero said excitedly as he snapped his fingers and everyone was back in the ship. As they looked around, the inside was a lot like the outside. Not the best condition, but it seemed like it would hold up. It could use some work, Izuku noted, touching one of the doors. Said door proceeded to crumple to dust. Oh oops, the greenette sweated. We all need to get a tetanus shot after this, Miles muttered. Ah, don't be like that, Zero smiled. It just needs a bit of a spit shine and it'll be good to go. Well, if you need help, I'm sure we'll be more than happy to offer a hand, RWBY stated, trying to be supportive despite her being wary of the ship as well. We will? Miles asked. You betcha, Zero exclaimed. Now onto your room. Room? Izuku asked. So, we don't expect any of you to actually stay here full time, Xena began. Usually after summoning you we'll drop you off within a few seconds to hours from when you left. Really? Miles said aloud. That would be really helpful. When he tried to be Spider-Man he had been worried how it would affect his schooling, but he wouldn't have to worry about it now. But if it'll be like we never even came here, why give us rooms at all then? RWBY asked. Just in case there's a reason you have to stay on board, Xena answered. Long missions, injuries, or even if you just want to get away, Izuku looked up at the last remark. Considering what his life was like back in his world, that particular benefit sounded really appealing. Before he could ask for details like how long he could actually stay on the ship, they came onto a door. Now I'll be honest, I was only allowed to make 2 rooms, Zero said. So, you'll have to share. Not too bad, Miles replied. Izuku and I will take one while RWBY and Eri takes the other. RWBY and Izuku nodded in agreement at the answer. Nothing wrong with that. Although considering the state of the rest of the ship he was worried about what was waiting for them on the other side of the door. Oh no, one of them is just for Eri, Zero denied. There was a pause as everyone took in Zero's words. So, wait, all 3 of us are sharing a room, the 3 of them shouted together before looking at each other in surprise. I'm sleeping in the same room as a girl, Izuku panicked. I'm sleeping in the same room as a boy, RWBY panicked. I'm calling top bunk, Miles thought, not freaking out over everything. Before any form of protest could be made, the door opened. It's not much to look at, Zero admitted. Could be worse, Miles shrugged. It at least looked better than everything they had seen so far. However, these restrictions won't last, Zero clapped his hands. As soon as they see how great of a team we are, they'll be lifting them, he said confidently. Now let's see Eri's room, Xena said, leading the tour to the door right next to their room. The 3 let the word sink in. They were about to see Eri's room. The room for a small child. Inside of a ship that wasn't in the best state. Okay, so I think we should let Eri come sleep with us in our own worlds, Izuku said, huddling up with Miles and RWBY. No problem, we can take shifts on where she stays, RWBY agreed. My house has a room that's not currently being used, she just had to make sure her uncle didn't leave anything that Eri shouldn't be around behind. I sleep in a dorm, but I can at least take her on weekends, Miles added. How come you get her on weekends? RWBY frowned. That's when we can do fun stuff. I just told you I live in a dorm, Miles rolled his eyes. I have a roommate. Sounds like an excuse, RWBY countered. I think we can come up with a compromise, Izuku offered. You guys coming? The trio turned from their huddle to see Zero, Xena and Eri looking at them in confusion. Talk later, Miles said while the other 2 nodded. The 3 separated and walked into the open door. And what they saw made their eyes widen. This was Eri's room. It was so nice the trio let out a collective sigh at the room, relieved she wouldn't be living in anything decrepit. Whoa, Eri, your room is so cool, RWBY said, looking around the space. Oh really? Eri asked. Oh definitely, Miles smiled. Why, you can have it if you want, Eri said fearfully. She didn't want them to be mad at her for having a better room. Nah, Miles blew off. We'll be just fine in our place. But maybe we can have sleepovers in your room, RWBY offered. What's a sleepover? Eri asked innocently. Once again the 3 were reminded that whatever Overhaul had been doing to the girl had stunted her if she didn't even know what a sleepover was. It's when a group of people sleep in the same room, Izuku answered. Last one he had been to had been Kakin's 5th birthday. Oh really? Eri asked in awe at the notion. Yeah definitely, RWBY chirped. We'll play games, tell stories and eat treats. Like apples? Eri asked hopefully. Like apples, RWBY nodded. So why is Eri's room so nice? Miles asked. Did you refurnish it? Something like that, Zero nodded. See, despite the restriction I was allowed to fix up 3 rooms of my choosing. Why only 3? They originally only allowed 1 room, Zero said before thinking. Actually, they didn't even want me to have a ship at first, but he kept that particular thought to himself. But I managed to haggle them up to 3, he said instead. These restrictions seem really excessive, Izuku frowned. You're telling me, Zero huffed before grinning once again. Next stop, the kitchen. With a nod the group made their way back in the halls and followed after the younger Eon towards the kitchen area. It didn't take long for them to arrive thankfully and found themselves in front of a nigger door. Zero didn't say much this time, instead giving them a wide grin they had become familiar with and letting the doors open so everyone could see. "Oh nice," Miles exclaimed. "Whoa," RWBY said in awe. "Amazing," Izuku added. Together the three began looking around the room taking in everything about it. "One of the other rooms I chose to renovate," Zero spoke. 3 stoves, 5 ovens, 3 sinks, 2 dishwashers, 4 microwaves, a shit ton of shelving space, and a big-ass pantry with even more shelving space," Zero said excitedly. Clearly, he was proud of his work. "That seems a bit excessive for just the 3 of us," Izuku uttered before coming across a strange device built into the wall. "That's a food creator," Zero explained. "Just press your hand here and think of what food you want and it'll make it." "Seriously?" Miles said walking over to them. "Yep," Zero looked smug. "You can even make the raw materials if you want to make a dish from scratch." "Why make the stoves then?" RWBY asked. "Just in case one of you guys takes it up as a hobby or something," Zero shrugged. "Some people find cooking relaxing." The RAG0N. "Like myself." Jury no. "Nifty." "Yes. Now we got 2 more rooms to visit," Zero said once again leading them out of the kitchen and through the halls. "While we're walking, anyone got any questions?" "Actually, how old are you guys?" RWBY wondered. "There's a clear distinction in age but being eons." "Please don't call us that," Xena sighed. "I thought you all might be around the same age." "Nope." Zero chuckled. "Zero is young," Xena said. "He is less than 800 years old." The trio felt their eyes widened as they looked over at the person who was giving them a wide grin. "Think of him as a teenager around your age." "I really couldn't." "Wanna guess how old she is?" Zero chuckled. "She's actually really young." "Really?" Izuku asked. "Oh, only a few billion years old," Xena smiled. Miles choked on the water he was drinking. RWBY nearly slipped mid-step. Izuku stabbed through his notebook. "That was young." "She doesn't look it, does she?" Zero asked with a mischievous smile. "No," Miles answered catching his breath. "She really doesn't." "Why thank you," Xena smiled while Zero did his best to hold in his laugh. It was clear to them he was trolling them. "As I am older than Zero, then I have had time to master more abilities and take them to higher levels," she explained. "I'll also be guiding Zero as best I can to gain more experience." "Right, you mentioned that before," Izuku said writing in his notebook. "What does that entail?" "Young Eons are given an older Eon to guide them when taking care of their first multiverse," Zero said. "Once I know he can handle it, I'll be returning to my own duties full time," Xena said. "You mean guarding your part of the Omniverse?" Izuku asked. He was still reeling from that particular piece of information. Omniverse. The all-encompassing word. Literally. "Something like that," she smiled and there was a twinkle in her eyes. "Although I suspect my time here won't be long," she added looking over at Zero. "I'm sure he'll be guarding this place with ease in no time along with you 3. "You betcha," Zero exclaimed. "Now for my favorite room." Zero opened the doors and the group came face to face with game room. RWBY cheered instantly understanding what this room was. Then before anybody could stop her she sped in with her semblance looking around at all the games for her to play. "Amazing," Izuku said looking at the setup in awe. Xena sighed. Maybe she spoke too soon. "I got just about every game in the Omniverse in here," Zero said proudly. "If you happen to see any I'm missing feel free to bring them on board." "So let me get this straight," Miles shook his head. "You were allowed to upgrade 3 rooms." "Yep. And instead of giving us a nice room like what Eerie has, you decided to use the 3rd one to make a game room." "Pretty much." "Awesome," Miles whispered, then he followed RWBY and Izuku's example and dived into the room. "So many board games," Izuku smiled. "Oh, so many dice," RWBY said. "Almost seems like it's too much." "There's no such thing as too much dice." Miles and Izuku looked up realizing they had said that at the same time. The two turned to look at each other with wide eyes. "You play D&D?" The two spoke simultaneously again. "What's D&D?" RWBY asked looking over at the boys. But they shouted looking horrified at a response. "As fun as this is," Xena interrupted before the boys could show RWBY the light. "We have one more room to show you and it is arguably the most important one." "What room is it?" Eerie asked. "The quarterdeck," Zero grinned. "Or as some call it, the captain's deck." They had all been more reluctant to leave the game room, but Zero said they could come back to it once the tour was done. Soon they found themselves in front of the door to the last room they needed to see. "Ready?" Zero asked, and the trio along with Eerie nodded. Without much fanfare Zero opened the doors letting the group into the last room on the tour. "As much as I hate to say it, I think this room should have been the 3rd room you upgraded over the game room." Miles struggled to even finish the sentence, but none of them could disagree. even if they hated it. Maybe, Zero conceded. But so worth it. It really wasn't, Xena sighed. Besides, you all won't be the ones piloting anyway, Zero added. Duo is. Duo? Ruby asked. Oh, new friends, a voice cheerfully exclaimed. What the hell, Miles shouted as they all looked around in shock. Do I have two? A second voice that sounded like the first one groaned. Another one, Ruby said. Duo is the AI of the ship, Zero explained. Since there might be times when I have to separate from you, she'll be the one to call you if we have any missions for you. Nice to meet you, the first happy voice greeted. Now leave me alone, the second more annoyed voice groaned. They seem nice, Ruby offered. Duo also handles the autopilot, but there is a manual form for whenever one of you have to drive, Zero added. Why would any of us have to drive? Miles asked. Just in case we run into an Everstorm or pirates, Zero responded. Everstorm? Miles asked. Pirates? Ruby exclaimed. Oh, and can't forget about Muta. Muta? Izuku wondered. Now that we're done, how about them games? Zero asked. Instantly any questions were halted as they all really wanted to go back to the game room. It was so tempting. But the three teens looked at each other, coming to the same conclusion that they should have their questions answered before moving back to the game room. Could we get some answers to a few things first? Izuku asked with a shy smile. Zero smiled and nodded. He got ready to ask them what they wanted to know, but stopped and whipped his head around. The trio watched as Zero began to look off in the distance, looking at something that only he could see. Slowly a grin spread across his face. Looks like it's gonna have to wait, he said, turning back to the three as his words washed over them. Why? Ruby asked. Then an alarm began to go off. Everyone other than Zero and Xena began looking at the sudden alarm, wondering what it could be. However, after a moment of thinking about it, there could only be one reason why an alarm would be going off. Because we just got a mission, Zero answered. Their first mission. It was time. The first mission for the memories. Miles Morales let out a resolute huff as he walked forward. It was time for his first mission along with Izuku and RWBY, and he was pumped. He looked around the streets and in all honesty, he couldn't believe how normal it looked. A modern city with people going about their day bustling through the streets. If he didn't know any better, he would never believe it was a different world from his own. You guys ready for this? Miles asked, looking at his two companions. Though he already knew the answer. Nope, RWBY denied. Then not really, Izuku stuttered. Maybe he didn't know the answer. How come you're not excited? Miles asked. We're in a different world, he whispered the last part as people came walking by. Xena had made it very clear no one else could know about their status. Oh please, RWBY scoffed. The only reason you're so excited is because the mission is taking place during a party, she said, pointing at the large house in front of them. Within the widow's flashing lights could be seen along with silhouettes dancing to a song playing within the confines of the house. Indeed, the location of their first mission was a house where a party happened to be taking place. According to the details Zero had given them, whatever happened during the party is the reason everything went wrong. But why does our first mission have to be during a party? RWBY groaned. It could be worse, Izuku offered weakly. Although the shaking of his knees wasn't helping his case. I'm just glad they had a clothes fabricator, Miles chuckled. Gotta keep the threads fresh. I still don't know how you got us in these clothes, RWBY moaned, looking down at her outfit, making Izuku do the same. Cause we look good, Miles smirked. I still think you should have gone with pants, Miles pointed at RWBY. Never, RWBY hissed. She was a skirt girl for life. I'm actually more nervous about the result if we fail, Izuku admitted. That did make other two pause. He had a point. Apparently, what went wrong in this party caused the world to be destroyed. Their mission was to prevent that from happening. Their first mission. No pressure. No need to focus on that though, Izuku said quickly, seeing his two companions nervous. We can focus on something else if that helps. Well, there is one thing that has been mothering me, RWBY admitted, looking over at Miles, who nodded ardor. Izuku watched the two nod at each other before looking back at him with determined expressions. What's that? Izuku asked, fearing the worst. What does the shirt say? Miles asked. Izuku blinked as he looked down at the kanji on his shirt. Pants, he answered honestly. Your shirt says pants. RWBY raised an eyebrow. Oh why yes, Izuku answered. PFFT, RWBY sputtered. That's funny. Clever, Miles chuckled. Anyways, we should be fine. After all, Zero said we just have to help the host. He hesitated at the last part. Still reeling from who the host is? RWBY questioned. Or rather what? Can you blame me? Miles countered as he knocked on the door. I mean the host is a. Hello, the three turned to see a teenage girl looking at them questioningly, having opened the door. Hi, Izuku began. We're here for the party. You don't look like you go to my school, the girl responded. We don't, RWBY admitted. We're from out of town and just happened to hear about the party while we were visiting. That's not a problem, is it? Miles asked. The girl eyed them skeptically before nodding. I guess it's okay, the girl shrugged. I'm Izuku, Izuku greeted. Thanks for having us. RWBY waved. Miles muttered, trying his best not to show his bewilderment at the girl. The girl looked at them before waving back. I'm Jenny, the girl smiled. It's nice to meet you. Flashback. That is a robot, Miles whispered. That is an actual teenage robot. I have so many questions, Izuku began pulling out his notebook. Maybe later, RWBY offered, though she was just as odd. The three of them were currently on the quarterdeck, listening as Zero gave them the details of their first mission. Xena was in the corner watching while Eerie sat in her lap fiddling with a toy the woman had given her. This is Jenny Wakeman, Zero explained, pointing at the holographic image of a blue and white robot who seemed to be made to look around their age. She is a highly advanced robot whose main purpose is to protect the planet Earth from threats. Seems standard, RWBY muttered. However, she had read enough manga to know there was a twist. What's the catch? For whatever reason her creator designed her to act like an actual teenager, Zero chuckled. Because of that she has a desire to go to school, make friends, and date. Ah. There it was. Sounds like a teenager, Miles nodded. Minus the school part, RWBY pointed out. Who actually wanted to go to school? I think it's more the experience than the result, Miles shrugged. Like how people say size matters. Phrasing, Zero chuckled. Seems simple, Izuku muttered as he wrote in his notebook. What is the problem on her world? He couldn't imagine it was anything too crazy. Sadly, it seems her desire to be a real teenager is gonna cause the destruction of her planet. The three teens shouted with wide eyes at the words. Flashback end. So according to what Zero said, something happens at this party that causes her planet to be taken over by an alien race known as the Minusians, Izuku said as he sat with Miles and RWBY in the corner while they observed the party. Which can we go over the fact that we are helping a teenage robot stop an alien invasion, Miles pointed out. Like, let's really think about that sentence for a moment. Don't forget it's in another universe, RWBY added. Thank you, RWBY, Miles said sarcastically. No problem, RWBY retorted. What could possibly happen here to cause the destruction of an entire planet, Izuku wondered as he began looking around. Then he caught a girl grinding on a boy and instantly looked away. For now I say we just blend in, Miles offered. Keep an eye out for anything that seems off. Blend in, RWBY started looking around only to see a couple making out in the corner. At a party, Izuku finished. I think I should go talk to Jenny, RWBY and Izuku said at the same time. The two looked at each other in surprise before narrowing their eyes. For the first time they felt they couldn't trust each other. My social awkwardness depends on this, the two thought before pulling back their arms. It was time to strike. Their hands shot towards each other. Rock crushed the scissors. No, RWBY cried at her defeat. So, rock paper scissors is universal, Miles noted. Cool. Well, I'm off, Izuku said before his urge to let RWBY go instead took over. Well, RWBY whined. I'm doomed. Come on, drama queen, Miles rolled his eyes as he dragged RWBY into the throng of teens dancing. I'm sure we can find something you like doing here. Nothing, RWBY shouted. Nothing, I say. There's no way is that pin the tail on the grim? Why must they keep making a mess, Jenny groaned, sweeping up something off the floor. Comes with the territory of the party. You could have warned me, Brad, Jenny scowled. Don't worry about it too much, Brad reassured. I'll run damage control wherever I can. You sure that'll look good with the ladies, Jenny teased. The Brad man is always good with the ladies, he smirked. Even with the bubble pipe, she said, pointing to the pipe in his mouth that blew bubbles instead of smoke. Jury. Seriously? The RAG0N. Seriously? Especially the pipe, he finished before walking further into the party. Jenny watched him talk to a couple girls only for them to snub him. She had to give it to her best friend, he was confidant. Her musing was interrupted as she found herself picking up another mess. Seriously? Need some help? Jenny turned to see Izuku smiling at her, holding out a trash can for her to dump the trash she had swept up in. Thanks, Jenny nodded. But you don't have to do that. It's no problem, Izuku replied. I can see that you needed help. Well, that's nice of you, Jenny smiled. Thanks, Izuku. Then no problem, he scratched the back of his head in awkwardness. So what's with the goggles, Jenny asked. They just a thing, Izuku answered hesitantly. He had found them in the supply closet on the ship when they had been getting equipped for this mission. Although there is something I wanted to ask you, Izuku said, changing the subject. What's up? Jenny tilted her head. What's with the giant X in the middle of the floor? He pointed to the giant X that the teens were dancing on. Oh, that's where the Minusians are going to land, Jenny shrugged, causing all thoughts in Izuku's head to come to a screeching halt. Minusians? He asked slowly. Oh yeah, it's this alien race that comes once a year to try and take over Earth. Izuku took a moment to let that statement sit with him. Wait, how do you know they're going to land here? He continued. Oh, that's because they always land here. Jury. You can't be serious. The RAG0N. I kid you not, this is the actual premise of this episode. So, wait, there's an alien race that comes to try and take over Earth every year, and they come on the same day at the same time and land in the same location, the Green tasked. Yep, Jenny nodded. And you decided to throw a party the same day of the attack. Izuku tried to get confirmation. Or better yet, a denial and explain things differently. It's the first time my mom was out of town without me, and I wanted to make the most of it, she answered sheepishly. If Izuku didn't know any better, he thought she was blushing under the lights. Was this a normal thing for teenagers to do? Izuku really didn't know since he never went to parties. That would require friends or an invitation. Yet he felt the situation was a bit bizarre. However, he was in different universe, so maybe the rules were different. You sure this was the best thing to do? He asked. I'm starting to regret it, Jenny admitted, looking around at the party-goers. They keep making a mess. As if to prove her point, someone spilled a cup on the floor, causing the teen robot to groan. I just got so excited cause it's the first party I've ever thrown, she said. Hell, this is the first one I've been to. Well, I guess that makes two of us, Izuku smiled, causing her to look at him. Truth be told, this is my first party too. Really? Yeah, Izuku nodded. And I think for your first one you did a really good job, Jenny smiled at Izuku, thankful the lighting made it impossible for him to see her blush. So at the very least I'll remember this party. Same for me, Jenny nodded. I guess it can be a memory we can share. I'll talk to my friends about helping you run damage control around the house, Izuku told her. Really? Jenny asked. You don't have to. It's fine, they won't mind, Izuku nodded. Makes it more memorable after all, he joked, making Jenny giggle at his awkwardness. So out of curiosity, how exactly are you supposed to stop these aliens? Izuku wondered. With that, Jenny lazily pointed to something in the corner. Izuku looked to where she was pointing and blinked. Is that a vacuum cleaner? Husk. What the shit? The RAG0N. I told you this episode was insane. I'd admit I did not see that coming, Miles muttered. Neither did I, Brad added, standing next to Miles. The two had run into each other a few minutes ago and had hit it off. Now the two were currently watching a bizarre scene they had not expected to see. So what's with the goggles? Just a thing, Miles shrugged. Hey Miles. Miles turned to see Izuku and Jenny walking over to him. Sup Zuku, he greeted. Zuku? Nickname, Miles shrugged. It was that or is he? I'm still debating. Better than Deku I suppose, Izuku thought, but kept it to himself. Enjoying yourself? Miles asked. A bit, yeah, Izuku nodded. Glad to hear it, Brad smiled. Me and Jen really wanted this to be a success. Zuku, this is Brad, Miles introduced. He helped Jenny throw the party. Barely, Jenny said playfully. Ouch, Brad fake winced. Nice to meet you, Izuku waved. Have you seen RWBY? I'm worried about her spiraling. Well, she was spiraling until she found a part of this party she actually enjoyed, Miles explained. Really, what is it? He asked. Wow, you're really good at this. Izuku looked to see a young boy cheered, looking up at RWBY. Thanks Tuck, RWBY smirked. I am the pin the tail on the Donkey Queen. RWBY, 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 the crowd cheered. By the way, what's with the goggles? Tuck asked. Just a thing, RWBY cheered as they continued to chant her name. I don't believe it, Jenny muttered. Tuck's game is actually popular. He's not gonna let me live this down for a while, Brad sighed, knowing how his brother could get. We can run damage control no problem, RWBY bragged, still high from her success at the game. That'd be a big help, Jenny smiled before her eyes drifted over to Miles, who was looking at her strangely. Everything okay? You've been staring at me weirdly since we met. Sorry, it's just you're an actual teenage robot, Miles said. It's throwing me off a bit. I understand, Jenny nodded. She remembered Tuck's first time meeting her. Not to mention her first day of school. So, kind of stuff can you do? RWBY asked. I'm dying to know. Well, I can do this, Jenny offered, holding her hands out, and everyone watched as they came together and created a big camera. Wanna take a picture? Her arms turned into a giant camera, Izuku whispered as he began writing the notebook he pulled from somewhere. Can she morph her body into other things? What kind of things? How is all stored? Are there nanomachines involved? That would explain how she's able to keep her cute appearance. But does she mumble? Does he? Brad began. Yes, Miles and RWBY answered simultaneously. Where did he get? Brad continued. Don't ask, we don't know, the two answered simultaneously again. However, Jenny only focused on one word. Cute, she squeaked. After pulling Izuku from his analyzing and taking a few photos together for the memories, the five teens separated to run damage control. Sir, does that look like coaster to you? That is a chandelier, not a tire swing. Please keep your shirt on. Have you never heard of coasters who raised you people? It was harder than they expected. But overall they had it under control. At least until. Dude, what are you doing? Miles shouted. He spotted 3 teens kicking around the vacuum that could apparently defeat the aliens that would be arriving soon. This proved to be a mistake as it spooked the teens, causing the vacuum to fall to the ground with a resounding crack. Oh no, Jenny cried, quickly picking up the vacuum. She began to look over it, and as her fear began to turn to dread. Is it okay? RWBY asked. She received her answer when smoke began to pour from the sides. That's not good, Izuku whispered. What is wrong with you? Miles exclaimed, looking at the teens. She took our hacky sack, the teen explained. So, you replaced it with a piece of machinery? Miles would have continued to reprimand his fellow teens, but this was the straw to break the camel's back. Or rather, robots. That is it, Jenny roared. Everybody out. It was less of a command than a warning as Jenny literally began throwing everyone out. Soon enough the only ones left in the house were Jenny, Brad, Tuck, Izuku, Miles and RWBY. It's broken. Jenny cried in anguish, looking down at the vacuum. What am I going to do? She should have never thrown the party. She just wanted to experience a normal life as a teenager. Maybe she couldn't have that after all. Before she could spiral any further, a hand planted itself on her shoulder. She turned to see Izuku and the others looking at her. We'll get through this, Izuku smiled. We'll help any way we can, RWBY nodded. Really? Jenny asked in surprise. Always Jen, Brad smiled. I share most of the blame for this anyway. What kind of friend would I be if I left you out to dry? Thanks everyone, Jenny smiled as her eyes drifted over to Izuku specifically. Thank you so much. I can try and fix it, Izuku offered. I had an odd job involving fixing vacuums. Really, how long? Jenny asked as hope began to blossom. A day, Izuku admitted, dashing the little bit of hope Jenny managed to put together. But I'm a quick study, he assured, taking the device from her and began to work. While he's doing that, maybe we can fortify the place a bit for when the Minutions show up, Miles offered. How much time do we got left? According to my clock, Jenny focused on her internal clock to see the time and blinked. None. Oh. To emphasize her point, a giant shadow appeared over the house, causing all the teens to look up. They watched as the shadow grew smaller. Indeed, the shadow was becoming smaller and smaller. The group of teens watched as very small saucer entered the house through the open skylight and landed dead center in the X. What's with a frisbee? Miles muttered, then he caught the grave look on Jenny's face. No, he whispered, looking down at ship. This is the alien ship. As if to make it clear, it began to open and something came out. Here, Jenny said, giving everyone magnifying glasses. Everyone got to their knees to look at the enemy. That's a Minution? Brad asked, looking down at the extremely underwhelming enemy. You sure that's not just a cockroach cosplaying as the Burger King? Miles wondered, using his magnifying glass to look at the tiny creature. There's a Burger King? RWBY asked. Tell you later. Miles muttered. Seriously, Jenny? Brad questioned, looking at his friend. He had seen her take on bigger threats than this. Figuratively and literally. Since I got us into this mess, then I'll handle this, Brad said, lifting his foot. Wait, Brad, Jenny tried, but Brad had already brought his foot down, slamming it with all his might. Easy peasy, Brad said cockily. Does this technically count as murder? Miles asked hesitantly. I mean, that alien had sentience. This is gonna hurt, Jenny sighed. I'm sure the guy didn't feel anything, Brad placated. I meant for you, Jenny deadpanned. Brad blinked at that just in time as he felt his whole body rise. Ooh no, RWBY whispered, realizing what was about to happen. Before anyone could do anything, Brad was slammed into the ground. Oof, he wheezed before feeling his body rise, only to be slammed onto his back. And then fist stomach, then into a pillar, then the floor. Slam 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 slam. On and on the brutal beatdown went before the Minution decided it was done with Brad by throwing him into the wall. My man's just got dogged, Miles winced as they watched Brad go flying. Think you can work faster? RWBY stated, more than asked. Already on it, Izuku squeaked. He had questions about the physics of what just happened, but that could wait. Well, if it's just one we should be fine, RWBY offered. Jenny began. Oh god, what? Miles groaned. Jenny pointed back down, and Miles and RWBY looked back down at the Minution. And they watched as he became 2 and then 4 then 16. Is it cloning? It is. Izuku whipped his head back around, notebook in hand and stars in his eyes. Izuku focus, RWBY shouted as a very noticeable patch of green made itself known. And not the green she liked. It's not just the main one, Jenny exclaimed. They can each make a clone, she explained. This cloning speed is crazy, Miles shouted as he pushed back a group of the Minutions. It literally doubles the amount we have to fight. That must be what went wrong, Izuku thought as he put a screw in. With the vacuum useless, Jenny had no way of stopping the munitions. And with them doubling every few seconds, they would overrun the planet in less than a day, hell maybe under a couple hours. Just keep them off, izuku, Jenny shouted as her arms morphed to reveal laser guns. Your whole body's a weapon, Ruby shouted with stars in her eyes. So cool. Not the time, RWBY, Miles shouted as he charged forward. He grabbed a broom and swung it around, sending a few munitions flying. Right, RWBY nodded before activating her semblance and mowing through the munitions. Really wish I had crescent rows, she muttered. Whoa, she's fast, Jenny noted, seeing the RWBY become a red blur as she kept splittizing her way through groups of munitions. She then turned to see Miles swinging the broom around him, which would send large clumps of the munitions flying. That would have been normal. Except he was doing it while standing up straight on one of the walls, and he's strong. Her eyes drifted over to Izuku next as he continued to work on the vacuum. Just who are these guys? How's it coming? Brad asked, doing his best to keep the munitions away from Izuku. Should be done soon, the greenette answered. If only he could help in the fight. Wait. Flashback. Take this, Zero said, tossing Izuku a sphere. Just in case. What is? RWBY asked as the trio looked over it. That's a surprise, Zero smirked. Flashback end. Izuku reached into his pocket and pulled out the sphere he had been given. He said to press this button. Izuku thought, pressing down on the one button on the object. For a moment nothing happened. Then it began beeping. Izuku was confused at first until he realized the beeping was getting much faster. Oh no, Izuku thought in realization before tossing the object in a group of munitions where none of his allies were. Boom. Everyone watched as a large group of the munitions were consumed in a powerful explosion that shook the entire house. Jenny and Brad were shocked at the sudden explosion. What happened? Brad asked. Maybe I put too much power in that last blast, Jenny muttered. Gotta make sure I don't get too worked up. Meanwhile, the three other worlders were having a different reaction. They gave us a bomb, the three mentally screamed. I was carrying that in my pocket, Izuku thought, horrified. However, he was brought from his panicking as the machine in his hand beeped. He looked down at it and after a quick once-over held it up in triumph. Got it, Izuku proclaimed. You sure? Jenny asked. Nope, Izuku admitted, pointing the vacuum towards the munitions. Let's try it anyway. He squeezed the trigger and the vacuum activated. Everyone watched as every single munition was sucked into the vacuum without remorse. How they were all fitting in there they didn't know, but they were thankful for it. Soon enough all of the munitions were gone, with the added bonus of cleaning up the mess that was left behind by the teens. This left the house in perfect condition. We did it, RWBY cheered. Alright, Zuku, Miles exclaimed. Izuku chuckled at his friend before nodding to him and RWBY, who nodded back, understanding what he was trying to convey. I told you it was a dust cleaner, Brad said, smugly looking over at Jenny. Jenny playfully shoved. Looks like my mom's back, Jenny stated, hearing her garage door open. Thanks for all your help, Jenny smiled, turning to Izuku and the others, however stopped to see that they were gone. Where'd they go? Tuck asked. However, on her bed were the photo they had taken with a note. For the memories. Jenny smiled at the pictures and made a note to frame it later. Thank you for everything, she said, planting a kiss onto the picture of Izuku. You sure it was a good idea to leave like that? Miles asked as the three walked under the night sky. I know we needed to avoid any questions she definitely had, but, he trailed off. It's for the best, Izuku sighed. She was going to start asking where we were from, and we can't exactly answer that. True, RWBY agreed. Showing out abilities certainly made it worse. Think we'll ever get to come back? You will. The three looked up to see Zero standing in front of them, along with a door leading to absolutely nowhere. But we stopped the invasion, Izuku pointed out. Yes, you stopped a decision, Zero nodded. You don't really think one instance is enough to stop a world from imploding. So, the only way we'll see Jenny again is if something has gone wrong. Can't say for sure, Zero admitted. My omniscient is on the small side. Phrasing, Miles smirked. Zero laughed. Technically free traveling isn't permitted by the council, the three looked sad at that. But the three looked back at Zero as he began to walk through the door. What the council doesn't know won't hurt them. So overall, how did you like your first mission? Why did you give us a bomb? Zero cackled. I'm going to sleep so good when I get home, RWBY said as she stretched her arms out. The three of them were currently in their room packing up their stuff and getting ready to go back to their respective homes. Same, Miles sighed, slinging his backpack over his shoulder. You think all our missions will be as insane as that? I'm more worried that they'll be worse than that, Izuku pointed out. That caused all three to shudder. Well, until next time guys, Miles said as he began to open a portal. You The three turned to see Eri standing in front of the door to her room, looking at them with nervousness. What's up, Eri? Izuku asked. See, can I sleep with you tonight? She asked shyly. Izuku looked surprised at the request, but that soon gave way to a gentle smile. Of course you can, he answered. We can join if you want, Miles offered, turning away from the watch. He didn't interact with his roommate much, so he doubted the guy would notice him being gone for a night. Why yes, Eri answered quickly. Clearly, she wanted them all to stay with her. Our first mission and our first sleepover, RWBY chirped. It was clear all plans to go back home were forgotten. Mind if I join? Zero asked, and from behind Eri, who looked at him in surprise. The surprise quickly disappeared to eagerness as Eri nodded her head in approval. Awesome. The more the merrier, RWBY said excitedly. She had gotten into it the most. We're gonna get snacks and tell stories and play fun games, it's gonna be awesome, she said as she led them all into Eri's room. We're gonna stay up all night, RWBY exclaimed. The other boys cheered. Eri simply nodded, trying to pump herself up as well. Eri was nuzzled up to Izuku, who had his arms wrapped around the small girl. RWBY was lower on the bed, using the greeneat's leg as a pillow with half her body hanging off said bed. Miles sitting against the wall, his head leaning against the bed, lightly snoring. She took notice of Zero by the window, looking at the teens with a bright smile. How long before they fell asleep? Xena asked. They conked out as soon as they laid down, Zero chuckled. For their first mission I think it went well. To be fair, it was one of the easier ones, Xena pointed out. Jury. Seriously, they stopped an alien invasion. The RAG-0N. I don't make the rules. Husk Jury. Liar. They can handle it, Zero dismissed. His unwavering confidence in them was something Xena had to admire. He truly believed in them. However, that wouldn't be enough. They plan to call you soon about them, Xena said. Shocker, Zero rolled his eyes, knowing by they she meant the council. They're the ones that decided to give me a dying multiverse, Zero countered. And it's not like I'm the first one to ever call for support from residents within a multiverse I look over. I know, Xena answered sadly. Zero simply shrugged, it wasn't like he didn't see this coming. He looked down at the teens and Eri and nodded to himself. These were his troubles, he wouldn't get them involved if he could help it. Their interference might get them involved. They can try, Zero answered as his red eyes began to glow, his smile became more feral. It won't end well for them, it was clear he would fight them if it came to it. That's what worried Xena the most. In an unknown location, someone sat in a chair with the lights off as they talked to someone over the phone. Yeah, we can get that taken care of for you, a voice nodded. How soon do you need it done? He nodded his head to the words of the voice on the other side of the phone. And how much did you say you were paying? The caller answered, and his smile just got bigger. You got it. The voice on the other end asked something else. Yeah, we can get it done easily, the person in the chair swiveled it around. After all, at IMP we take care of all your assassination needs, Blitz grinned. He spun the knife in his hand before stabbing it into the photo of his team's next target. Satisfaction guaranteed. Let me know in the comments below if you guys want the next part. Also check out my other video that has been shown and left. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and share this video. And have a fantastic day. Bye.